Hey night traveler, welcome to the Stealth Podcast. Here, you'll hear chilling stories to help you drift off or keep you awake. If you're into that vibe, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, kill the lights, put your headphones on, and let's hit the road. My name is Gerald Hoffman. I'm 43 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. I've been doing the Vanlife thing for about 8 months when I decided to head down to Cancun. My buddy Marcus, who's 38 and works remotely as a graphic designer, convinced me to make the trip with him. We'd converted our vans together back in Austin. Mine was a 2015 Ford Transit, his was a Dodge ProMaster. The plan was simple: drive down through Mexico, find some cheap spots to park near the beach, and live like kings on a shoestring budget. Marcus had this whole romantic idea about it, kept sending me Instagram photos of other vanlifers living their best lives in tropical paradise. What we didn't know was that Cancun had a darker side, one that tourists in their all-inclusive resorts never see. We crossed the border at Laredo and made our way south, stopping at different towns along the way. The drive took us 4 days, and by the time we rolled into Cancun, we were exhausted but excited. The tourist zone felt too expensive and crowded, so we asked around and found out about this neighborhood called Region 96, way past the hotel zone where locals actually lived. A guy at a taco stand told us there was an abandoned lot near there where some travelers parked for free. He said it was safe, that locals didn't bother anyone. Marcus was skeptical, but I was tired of spending money on campgrounds. We drove out there around sunset, and honestly, it looked sketchy as hell. The lot was surrounded by half-finished buildings and overgrown with weeds, but there were 2 other vans already parked there, which made us feel better. We pulled in, set up for the night, and that's when things started feeling off. The other vans looked like they'd been there a while. I mean really a while. One was a rusted-out Volkswagen Vanwagen with flat tires, and the other was a newer Sprinter that had this weird smell coming from it, even from a distance. Marcus walked over to knock on the Sprinter to say hello, but nobody answered. The windows were covered with reflective material, and there was this disturbing sticker on the back door, a smiley face with X's for eyes. Maybe they're just sleeping, Marcus said, but it was only 7 in the evening. I suggested we just mind our business and stay in our own vans for the night. We cooked dinner on our portable stoves, talked through our windows since we'd parked side by side, and tried to ignore the creepy vibe. Around 9 o'clock, I saw Marcus turn off his lights. I did the same shortly after, laying in my bed and scrolling through my phone, trying to get a signal strong enough to call my sister back home. That's when I heard it. Not footsteps or shadows or any of that typical horror stuff. I heard whistling. Someone was whistling a tune I recognized from childhood, something my grandmother used to hum. It was coming from outside, somewhere between our vans and those abandoned ones. I sat up and peeked through the curtain. In the dim moonlight, I could see a figure standing perfectly still about 30 feet away, just standing there in the tall grass. The person was wearing what looked like a mechanic's coverall, dark-colored, maybe blue or black. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I could see they were facing our direction. The whistling continued, cheerful and casual, like someone working on a car without a care in the world. My heart started pounding because something about the scene felt so wrong. Who just stands in an empty lot at night whistling? I grabbed my phone to text Marcus, but before I could type anything, my phone died. Dead battery, even though it had been at 40% just minutes before. The whistling stopped abruptly. Complete silence. I stayed frozen, watching through the crack in my curtain, and that's when the figure started walking. Not toward us, but toward that Sprinter van with the smiley face sticker. They moved slowly, deliberately, and pulled out what looked like keys. I heard the van door slide open with a metallic screech that made my skin crawl. A light came on inside briefly, just a flash, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. The interior wasn't set up for living. It was plastic sheeting everywhere, covering the walls and floor. And there were tools hanging on hooks, the kind you'd see in a garage, but also scary ones like the kind you'd see in a horror movie. The figure climbed inside and shut the door. I sat there in the dark, barely breathing, wondering what the hell we'd just parked next to. I wanted to start my van and get out of there immediately, but I was terrified the noise would draw attention. So I just sat there, waiting, listening, and praying that Marcus was asleep and hadn't seen what I'd just seen. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there in my van, clutching a wrench I kept in my toolbox, listening to every single sound outside. Around 3 in the morning, I heard that sliding door open again on the Sprinter, and the whistling started up once more. This time it was a different tune, something slower and more disturbing, like a lullaby gone wrong. I heard footsteps crunching through the gravel and weeds, circling around the lot. They'd stop for a while, then continue, like whoever it was checking on something or looking for something. At one point, the steps came right up to my van. I held my breath, gripping that wrench so hard my knuckles turned white. Through the thin metal wall, I could hear breathing, deep, steady breaths, like someone savoring the moment. Then whoever it was tapped on my van 3 times, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. My whole body went rigid with fear. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, the footsteps moved away toward Marcus's van. I heard the same 3 taps on his door. That's when I knew Marcus was awake too, because I heard a muffled sound from inside his van, like he'd bumped into something. The sun finally came up around 6:30, and I've never been so relieved to see daylight in my entire life. I jumped out of my van immediately and rushed over to Marcus's door, banging on it. "Marcus, we need to get the hell out of here right now." He opened his door looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands were shaking. "You heard it too?" he asked. I nodded. We both started talking at once, comparing what we'd experienced. He'd seen the figure too, and he'd heard the tapping. But he told me something I hadn't noticed. Around 4 in the morning, he'd heard what sounded like dragging, something heavy being pulled across the ground from that Sprinter to the old Volkswagen van. We both turned to look at the other vehicles. In the morning light, I could see fresh drag marks in the dirt, leading from one van to the other. There was also something dark staining the ground, a trail that looked disturbingly like dried blood mixed with dirt. "We're leaving right now," Marcus said, and I completely agreed. But when he tried to start his van, nothing happened. "Dead battery." He tried again, nothing. "That's impossible," he said. "I just replaced this battery 2 months ago." I went to start mine, and my heart sank. Same thing. Dead. Both our batteries were completely drained overnight, which made no sense unless someone had deliberately drained them. Marcus looked at me with pure terror in his eyes. Someone did this on purpose. They trapped us here. We stood there in the lot, the morning sun already getting hot, trying to figure out what to do. That's when I noticed the Sprinter van's door was slightly ajar, just an inch or two, like an invitation. "We need to get help," I said. "We need to walk to the main road and flag someone down." Marcus agreed, but as we gathered our phones and wallets, we heard a vehicle approaching. An old pickup truck pulled into the lot, beat up and rusted, with a man driving who looked to be in his 50s, wearing a straw hat and a friendly smile. He got out and walked over to us, speaking in Spanish. My Spanish is pretty basic, but I understood enough. He was asking if we needed help, if we had car trouble. Marcus, whose Spanish was better, explained our situation. The man nodded sympathetically and said he could jump our batteries, that he lived nearby and had cables in his truck. Relief washed over us. Maybe this was just a weird coincidence. Maybe we'd overreacted. The man walked over to his truck bed and pulled out jumper cables, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the back of his truck, partially covered by a tarp, I saw more of that plastic sheeting, the same kind I'd seen inside the Sprinter. And there was a tool belt sitting there with tools that were stained dark brown. The man caught me staring, and his smile got wider, showing yellow teeth. "Mechanico," he said, pointing to himself. "Mechanic." He gestured toward his tools, trying to explain, but something in his eyes didn't match his friendly demeanor. They were cold, calculating, like he was sizing us up. Marcus hadn't noticed what I'd seen. He was already popping his hood, eager to get his van started. The man walked over with the cables, and I wanted to scream at Marcus to stop, to run, but my voice caught in my throat. As the man connected the cables to Marcus's battery, I noticed his coveralls. They were dark blue, exactly like what the figure had been wearing last night. There was even a name patch on the chest that said Roberto in faded stitching. He finished connecting everything and told Marcus to try starting it. The engine turned over immediately, roaring to life. Marcus let out a relieved laugh. "Thank God," he said. The man, Roberto, smiled again and started unhooking the cables. "Ahora el otro," he said. "Now the other one." He walked toward my van, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to refuse, to just leave my van behind and pile into Marcus's. But I was frozen, watching as Roberto connected the cables to my battery. That's when I saw it clearly in the daylight. There were scratches all over his hands and forearms, fresh ones, like someone had fought back against him recently. And under his fingernails was what looked like dried blood. My van started up just as easily as Marcus's, and Roberto stood there grinning at us like he'd just done us the biggest favor in the world. Marcus was already climbing back into his driver's seat, ready to get out of there, but Roberto held up his hand. "Espera," he said. "Wait." He walked back to his truck and pulled out a small notebook and a pen, scribbling something down. He tore out the page and handed it to Marcus through his window. It was an address, written in shaky handwriting. Roberto explained in broken English that if we needed a place to park safely, his brother owned property closer to the beach, very secure, very private. He kept emphasizing private, like it was supposed to be a selling point. Marcus took the paper just to be polite and thanked him. I nodded from my van, trying to smile, but probably looking terrified. Roberto waved as we started pulling out of the lot, and I watched him in my side mirror. He didn't leave. He just stood there watching us drive away, and then he turned and walked toward that Sprinter van. We drove for about 20 minutes in convoy, not stopping until we found a busy parking lot near a commercial area with a Home Depot. We parked next to each other and both got out, visibly shaken. "That was him," I said immediately. "That was the guy from last night. Did you see his coveralls? Did you see the scratches on his arms?" Marcus looked pale. He pulled out the paper Roberto had given him and stared at it. "Should we go to the police?" he asked. "But go to them with what? We didn't actually see him do anything wrong. We had no proof. And honestly, we were foreigners in a country where we barely spoke the language, making accusations against a local based on a creepy feeling and some scratches. I've heard stories about how complicated things can get with Mexican police when you're a tourist. We decided instead to find a proper RV park, somewhere with security and other people around, and just forget this whole thing happened." Marcus pulled up his phone and found a place called Camping Quintana Roo about 40 minutes away. It cost $30 a night, but at that point, we would have paid anything to feel safe. We got to the campground around noon, and it was like entering a different world. There were families with kids, retired couples in huge RVs, people barbecuing and playing music. Normal, happy, safe. We checked in, parked our vans in adjacent spots, and finally allowed ourselves to relax a little. Marcus suggested we grab some beers and hit the beach to decompress, try to salvage what was left of our trip. We spent the afternoon in the tourist zone, swimming in that impossibly blue water, drinking Corona, trying to convince ourselves that last night was just a scare and nothing more. By the time evening rolled around, we were actually feeling better. We grabbed dinner at a little restaurant, watched the sunset, and headed back to the campground around 9. The guard at the gate waved us through, and we drove to our spots. That's when we saw it. Someone had been inside my van. The side door was open, not much, just a few inches, but I knew for certain I'd locked it before we left. My hands were shaking as I approached it. Marcus came up behind me with a flashlight from his van. "Maybe you just forgot to lock it," he said, but his voice was uncertain. I pulled the door open all the way and shined the light inside. Everything looked normal at first. My bed, my little kitchen setup, my clothes hanging on hooks. But then I saw it on my pillow. A small, folded piece of paper. Marcus saw it too. "Don't touch it," he said, but I was already reaching for it. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a note, written in the same shaky handwriting as the address Roberto had given Marcus. But this message was different, written in English. "You left your friend behind." Below the words was a crude drawing of a van with a smiley face, the same smiley face from the sticker on the Sprinter. My blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, reading over my shoulder. "What friend? There's only 2 of us." That's when it hit me, the old Volkswagen van back at that lot. Someone had been living in it, or had been kept in it, and we'd just driven away without checking if anyone needed help. The guilt hit me like a punch to the gut, but it was mixed with horror because that meant Roberto knew where we were now. He'd followed us, or maybe he'd been watching us all day. He'd broken into my van in a guarded campground and left this note as a message. Marcus was already on his phone trying to call the police, but I stopped him. "And tell them what?" "A guy left a weird note in my van. They're going to think we're paranoid tourists." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at something on his phone screen, his face going white. "Gerald," he said quietly, "look at this." He turned his phone toward me. He'd Googled Cancun missing tourists, and the results were disturbing. Over the past 2 years, at least 15 tourists had vanished from the Cancun area, most of them people traveling alone or in small groups, many of them doing the van life thing. The cases were largely unsolved. There were theories about cartel activity, but some of the details were scary. Several of the missing people's vans had been found abandoned in remote areas, completely cleaned out with plastic sheeting left behind. My vision started to blur as panic set in. We were being hunted by someone who'd done this before, probably many times. And he wanted us to know it. We didn't sleep in our vans that night. We checked into a cheap hotel room in the tourist zone. Both of us crammed into a room with 2 beds, and we still barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made us jump. Marcus kept refreshing that news page on his phone, reading through the details of the missing tourists, and each story was more disturbing than the last. One couple from Canada had disappeared after posting on social media about finding a secret free camping spot near Cancun. Their van was found 3 weeks later, stripped completely clean, with nothing but plastic sheeting and zip ties left inside. Another solo traveler from Germany had last been seen asking locals about safe places to park overnight. His van was never found, but his passport turned up in a dumpster behind a mechanic shop in Region 96, the same area where we parked. "We need to go back," Marcus said suddenly around 3 in the morning. I thought he'd lost his mind. "Go back where?" I asked. "To that lot. If someone's trapped in that Volkswagen van, we can't just leave them there to die." I wanted to argue with him, to tell him that was the stupidest idea I'd ever heard, but deep down I knew he was right. That note said we'd left someone behind, and if that was true, we were partially responsible now. But I also knew that going back there could be a death sentence for both of us. We argued for another hour, going back and forth, until we finally compromised on a plan. We'd go back in daylight, bring weapons. I had a tire iron and Marcus had a hunting knife he kept in his van, and we'd call the police the moment we saw anything suspicious. If the lot was empty or if those vans were gone, we'd just leave and try to forget this whole thing. At sunrise, we checked out of the hotel and drove back to the campground to get our vans. The guard looked at us funny when we rolled in at 6 in the morning, but he didn't say anything. We grabbed our makeshift weapons, filled up on gas, and started the drive back to Region 96. The closer we got, the more my stomach twisted into knots. The neighborhoods got poorer, the buildings more run down, and the streets emptier. We pulled into that lot around 7:30, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The Sprinter van was still there. So was the old Volkswagen. But Roberto's pickup truck was gone. Marcus and I parked near the entrance, keeping our engines running, doors unlocked, ready to bolt at any second. We got out slowly, looking around. The morning was quiet except for some dogs barking in the distance and the sound of traffic from the main road. "I'll check the Volkswagen," Marcus whispered. "You watch my back." I wanted to tell him no, that we should both check it together, but I also understood that someone needed to keep watch. He walked toward the rusted van with his knife gripped tight in his hand, and I stood by our vans with the tire iron, scanning the area constantly. Marcus reached the Volkswagen and cupped his hands against the window to look inside. I saw his body language change immediately. His shoulders tensed up and he stumbled backward. "Oh God," he said loud enough for me to hear. "Gerald, there's someone in here." My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to run over. The windows were dirty and tinted, but when I looked inside I could see what Marcus had seen. There was a person lying in the back, tied up with rope, duct tape over their mouth. It looked like a woman, maybe in her 30s, with dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her eyes were open, and when she saw us, she started thrashing and making muffled screaming sounds through the tape. She was alive. "We have to get her out," Marcus said, already trying the door handles. They were locked. He started looking around for something to break the window with, and that's when I heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. My blood turned to ice. It was Roberto's pickup truck, rolling into the lot slowly, deliberately. He parked blocking the exit, trapping us inside. He got out of the truck with that same friendly smile, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men got out with him, both wearing similar mechanic coveralls, both carrying tools that looked more like weapons, a crowbar, a large wrench. Roberto called out to us in Spanish, something about how we came back, how he knew we would. His voice was cheerful, almost playful, like this was all some kind of game to him. Marcus gripped his knife tighter and I raised my tire iron, but we both knew we were screwed. 3 of them. 2 of us, and they clearly had experience doing this. They started walking toward us slowly, fanning out to surround us. The woman in the van was thrashing harder now, her muffled screams getting more desperate. Roberto said something else in Spanish, and the other 2 men laughed. I caught the word turistas and plastico, plastic. My mind flashed back to that Sprinter van lined with plastic sheeting, and I realized we were looking at our own deaths walking toward us in broad daylight. Marcus looked at me, and I saw the same realization in his eyes. We were about to become another unsolved missing persons case. Marcus moved first. He didn't run toward our vans like I expected. He ran toward Roberto's truck. At first I thought he'd panicked, but then I understood. He was going for the truck to move it, to unblock our exit. I ran after him, and that's when everything turned into chaos. The 2 other men rushed at us, and Roberto started shouting orders in Spanish. I swung my tire iron at the guy with the crowbar, catching him in the shoulder. He screamed and stumbled back, dropping his weapon. Marcus made it to the truck and jumped in, but the keys weren't in the ignition. Roberto had them. I saw Roberto pulling something from his pocket. Not keys, but a knife. A real one, way bigger than Marcus's. He was coming straight for me. I backed up toward the Volkswagen van, my mind racing. The woman inside was still thrashing, and I made a split-second decision. I swung the tire iron as hard as I could at the van's window. It shattered on the second hit, glass exploding everywhere. The woman inside stopped thrashing for a second, stunned, then started wriggling toward the broken window. I reached in and started tearing at the duct tape on her mouth, while watching Roberto get closer. The tape came off and she gasped for air, then started screaming in Spanish, words tumbling out so fast I couldn't understand. But I heard one word clearly, Policia. She kept saying it over and over. I pulled out my phone to call, but Roberto was on me before I could dial. He grabbed my arm and twisted it hard, making me drop both my phone and the tire iron. His face was inches from mine, and that friendly smile was completely gone now. His eyes were dead, empty, like looking at a shark. He said something in English, broken but clear enough. You should have left. Then he raised the knife. I thought I was dead, but suddenly there was a loud bang, like a gunshot, and Roberto jerked sideways. For a second I thought he'd been shot, but then I realized Marcus had crashed Roberto's truck into one of the concrete pillars holding up an abandoned building structure nearby. The impact had knocked everyone off balance. Marcus stumbled out of the wrecked truck, bleeding from his forehead where he'd hit the steering wheel, but he was moving. Run, he screamed at me. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed the woman's arms and started pulling her through the broken window, not caring that the glass was cutting both of us. She was still tied at the ankles, but I dragged her anyway, and Marcus appeared next to me, his knife out, cutting through the rope around her legs. The 2 other men were getting back up, and Roberto was screaming at them, furious now. We got the woman free, and the 3 of us started running toward our vans. My legs were pumping so hard they burned, adrenaline drowning out everything else. Marcus got to his van first and jumped in. I pushed the woman toward my passenger door, and she climbed in while I ran around to the driver's side. Behind us I could hear Roberto and his guys running, shouting. I turned the key and my engine roared to life. Marcus was already moving, his van lurching forward. I slammed my foot on the gas, and we both swerved around Roberto's wrecked truck, scraping against it, but making it through. We flew out of that lot, doing probably 60 in a residential area, blowing through stop signs, not caring about anything except getting away. The woman in my passenger seat was crying and talking rapidly in Spanish, words I couldn't follow, but the terror in her voice was universal. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see Roberto's truck somehow chasing us, but there was nothing. We drove for maybe 10 minutes, putting as much distance as possible between us and that nightmare, before Marcus signaled to pull over near a gas station. We both stopped and got out, shaking, bleeding, traumatized. The woman got out too, limping, her wrists raw and bleeding from the ropes. She hugged both of us, crying, saying gracias over and over. Marcus called the police right there, and within 20 minutes we were surrounded by cop cars and an ambulance. The woman's name was Rosa. She'd been missing for 6 days. She'd been traveling alone in a converted van when she'd parked in that same lot, and Roberto and his crew had taken her. The police took our statements for hours. They went to the lot with a full tactical team, but by the time they got there, Roberto and his guys were gone. So was the Sprinter van. They found the Volkswagen and Marcus's account of what happened, and they found evidence inside that van. Hair, blood, personal items from multiple people. Rosa's testimony backed up everything we said. Over the next few weeks, we learned the full scope of it. Roberto wasn't just one guy. He was part of a whole operation that targeted solo travelers and vanlifers. They've been doing it for years, stealing from tourists, sometimes holding them for ransom, sometimes worse. The police found 3 more bodies buried near that lot based on what Rosa told them. 3 people who hadn't been as lucky as her. Marcus and I gave statements to investigators, to news reporters, to anyone who would listen. We wanted people to know what was happening, to be careful. Our Mexico trip was obviously over. We drove back to Texas the day after the police cleared us to leave, and we haven't spoken much since. Some experiences break the bond between people instead of strengthening it. Every time I see Marcus, I see that lot, those vans, Roberto's dead eyes. Last I heard, they still haven't caught Roberto or his crew. They've vanished like ghosts, probably setting up somewhere else, waiting for the next naive traveler. I sold my van 2 months after getting home. Couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 in the morning hearing that whistling, those 3 taps on my door. And I think about all the people who parked in places like that and never made it home, never got their chance to run. We were lucky. So many others weren't. My name is Diane Cartwright. I'm 52 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'd been living the van life solo for about 14 months when I decided to head down to Cancun for the winter. My daughter Emily, who's 29 and works as a nurse in Seattle, thought I was crazy for traveling alone at my age, but after my divorce and early retirement from teaching, I needed adventure. I'd converted a 2017 Chevy Express into a cozy little home, solar panels, a small kitchen, even a composting toilet. The freedom was intoxicating. I drove down through California, crossed into Mexico at Tijuana, and took my time exploring the Pacific coast before cutting inland toward the Caribbean side. The journey took me 3 weeks, and every day felt like rediscovering myself. When I finally arrived in Cancun, the tourist zone felt too sterile, too expensive. I wanted authentic Mexico, not resort Mexico. That's how I ended up in Puerto Juarez, a local neighborhood north of the hotel zone, where fishermen actually lived and worked. I found a small public beach access area where a few other travelers had parked their vehicles. There was a German couple in their 60s with a massive RV, and a young guy from California named Brett, who looked about 26, traveling in a gutted school bus he'd painted bright yellow. They'd both been there for weeks and said the locals were friendly, that police occasionally checked on everyone, but mostly left travelers alone. The spot wasn't fancy, just a dirt lot next to the beach with no amenities, but the ocean was right there, and at night you could hear the waves. I set up my van facing the water, introduced myself to my temporary neighbors, and felt like I'd finally found my paradise. Brett seemed nice enough, always offering to help carry water jugs or inviting people to beach bonfires. The German couple, Klaus and Greta, mostly kept to themselves but were polite when we crossed paths. Everything felt safe, peaceful, exactly what I'd been looking for. My 3rd night there, I was cooking dinner on my camp stove outside when Brett wandered over with a 6-pack of Pacifico. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. I didn't mind the company, so we sat in my folding chairs watching the sunset, talking about our travels. He'd been on the road for 8 months, he said, just drifting from place to place with no real plan. He asked a lot of questions about me, where I was from, if I was traveling alone, if anyone back home knew exactly where I was. At the time, the questions seemed like normal getting to know you conversation, but looking back, I realized he was gathering information. He mentioned he'd been thinking about moving his bus further down the coast, maybe toward Tulum, because Cancun was getting too crowded with tourists. I laughed because there were literally only 5 vehicles in our little spot. He didn't laugh back. He just stared at the ocean with this distant look, and the energy shifted into something uncomfortable. After Brett left, I noticed Klaus standing outside his RV, smoking a cigarette, watching us. When he saw me looking, he walked over. His English was heavily accented but clear. "Be careful with that one," he said quietly, nodding toward Brett's yellow bus. Something is not right with him. I asked what he meant, but Klaus just shook his head. Greta and I, We have been traveling for many years. You learn to read people. That boy, he watches too much. He asks too many questions. Yesterday, I saw him looking through the window of a van that was parked here, one that left this morning. The people inside, they left very early, before sunrise, like they were scared. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Brett was just socially awkward. Maybe Klaus was being paranoid. I thanked him for the concern and went back into my van for the night, locking both doors. I tried to read a book, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about Brett's questions, about the way he'd looked at me when I mentioned that my daughter was my only family and that I didn't check in with her regularly because I wanted to feel truly independent. Around midnight, I heard voices outside. I peeked through my curtain and saw Brett talking to someone I hadn't seen before. A local guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing dirty jeans and a tank top. They were standing near Brett's bus, speaking in low tones, and the local guy kept gesturing toward the other vehicles, including mine. I saw him point directly at my van, and Brett nodded. They talked for maybe 5 minutes. Then the local guy walked away into the darkness, and Brett went into his bus. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. Was I overreacting? Was this just a normal conversation with a local acquaintance? But Klaus's warning kept echoing in my head, and my gut was screaming that something was very wrong. I decided right then that I'd leave in the morning, early, before anyone else was awake. I'd find another spot, maybe even spring for a real campground with security. But when I tried to start my engine just to make sure it would turn over, nothing happened. The battery was completely dead, and I'd just replaced it 3 months ago in Texas. I barely slept that night, just dozed off in anxious intervals, jolting awake at every sound. At first light, around 6:30, I climbed out of my van as quietly as possible and popped the hood to check the battery. The connections looked fine, nothing obviously wrong, but it was definitely dead. I was standing there trying to figure out what to do when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around and nearly screamed. It was Brett, standing maybe 10 feet away, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need some caffeine," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you trying to start your engine last night. Battery trouble." My mouth went dry. How had he heard that from inside his bus? Unless he'd been awake, listening, waiting. I forced myself to smile back and took the coffee he offered, even though every instinct told me not to drink anything this guy gave me. "Yeah, it's weird. Battery just died out of nowhere," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Brett took a sip from his own cup and shrugged. "That happened to another van here last week. Guy thought someone had drained his battery on purpose. Paranoid, you know? Turned out it was just a faulty connection." The way he said it, so casual, made my skin crawl. He was telling me he knew exactly what had happened to that van, the one Klaus mentioned that left before sunrise. "I've got jumper cables," Brett continued. "I could help you out, but my bus battery is pretty low too. We'd probably need to get someone with a truck to jump us both." He gestured toward the road. "My buddy from last night, Carlos, he's got a truck. He lives just a few blocks away. I could walk over and get him if you want." Everything in my body screamed no. The last thing I wanted was that guy from last night coming here with his truck. "That's okay," I said quickly. "I actually have roadside assistance through my insurance. I'll just give them a call." Brett's smile faltered for just a second, and I saw something flicker across his face. Annoyance, maybe anger. "Suit yourself," he said. "But cell service out here is pretty spotty. Might take them hours to find this place." He was right about the cell service. I had 1 bar, maybe 2 if I stood in the right spot. But I wasn't about to walk anywhere with Brett or wait for his buddy Carlos to show up. As soon as Brett went back to his bus, I hurried over to Klaus and Greta's RV and knocked on their door. Klaus answered, already dressed, and his face turned serious when he saw my expression. I explained everything in a rushed whisper. The dead battery, Brett showing up with coffee, the conversation with Carlos last night. Greta appeared behind Klaus, and they exchanged a worried look. "We are leaving today," Klaus said firmly. "We were already planning to go. You should come with us. We can tow your van to a mechanic in the city." Relief flooded through me. "Yes, please. Thank you." Klaus nodded and started preparing their RV to tow my van. It took about 30 minutes to get everything hooked up properly, and the whole time I felt Brett watching us from his bus. He didn't come over, didn't say anything, just stood in his doorway with his arms crossed. We were almost ready to leave when a white pickup truck pulled into the lot. It was Carlos, the guy from last night, and he wasn't alone. There were two other men with him, sitting in the truck bed. My stomach dropped. Carlos got out and walked straight toward us, calling out something in Spanish. Klaus responded in German-accented Spanish, something short and firm. Carlos laughed and kept walking closer. That's when I noticed all three men had machetes. Not unusual for locals who worked in agriculture or fishing, but the way they were carrying them felt threatening. Klaus quickly ushered Greta and me into the RV. "Get inside, lock the door," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were scared. I climbed into the RV with Greta while Klaus stayed outside, standing between us and Carlos. Through the window, I could see Brett had come out of his bus now, and he was talking to Carlos like they were old friends, both of them looking toward Klaus and the RV. Carlos started arguing with Klaus, his voice getting louder, more aggressive. One of the other men from the truck jumped down and started walking around the RV, looking at the tires, the hitch connecting my van. He said something to Carlos, and they both laughed. Greta grabbed my hand. "They are saying the van is theirs now," she whispered, translating. "They are saying Klaus stole it from someone who owed them money." It was a complete lie, an obvious setup, but I understood what was happening. This was how they operated. They disabled vehicles, waited until people were desperate and vulnerable, then either extorted them or worse. And Brett was working with them, scouting for targets, friendly American helping to lure in other travelers. Klaus was still arguing, but I could see him reaching for his phone. Before he could dial, one of the men grabbed it out of his hand and threw it on the ground, stomping on it. That's when Klaus made a decision. He jumped into the RV, slammed the door, and locked it. "Hold on," he shouted, and he started the engine. The RV lurched forward with my van still attached, and we heard Carlos screaming behind us, the sound of machetes banging against the metal walls. Klaus drove that RV like a madman, bouncing over potholes and tearing through the dirt lot toward the exit. Behind us, I could hear my van rattling on the tow hitch, and through the back window, I saw Carlos and his men running for their truck. Brett was standing in front of his yellow bus with his arms still crossed, watching us flee with that same blank expression. We made it to the main road, and Klaus didn't slow down, weaving through morning traffic, running red lights, doing everything he could to put distance between us and them. Greta was on her phone trying to call the police, but she was having trouble explaining the situation in Spanish. After about 10 minutes of driving, Klaus finally slowed down and pulled into a busy gas station. We all sat there breathing hard, looking at each other like we couldn't believe what had just happened. "We go to police station now," Klaus said. "This is very serious. These men, they are dangerous." I nodded, but something was bothering me. How did they know to show up right when we were about to leave? We drove to the nearest police station, a small concrete building with bars on the windows and two police trucks parked outside. Inside, we tried to explain what happened to the officer at the desk, but the language barrier made it difficult. Eventually, they found someone who spoke decent English, a female officer named Lieutenant Vega. We told her everything: Brett, the dead battery, Carlos and his men, the threats. She listened carefully, taking notes, and her expression grew more concerned as we talked. When we finished, she made a phone call, spoke rapidly in Spanish, then turned back to us. "This is not the first time we hear about this area," she said. "There have been complaints from tourists. 3 months ago, a Canadian woman reported similar situation, dead battery, men with machetes demanding money. But when we investigated, everyone was gone. No evidence." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The American boy you describe, Brett, we have file on him. He has been in Mexico for 2 years, not 8 months like he told you. He moves around the coast, different cities, always near where tourists park." My blood went cold. 2 years. And he was still out there, still doing this, and the police knew about him but couldn't catch him. Lieutenant Vega explained that Brett always disappeared before they could question him, and without solid evidence or victims willing to stay in Mexico to press charges, their hands were tied. She took down all our information and promised to send officers to check the beach lot, but she warned us that everyone would probably be gone by now. She was right. When officers went there an hour later, they called back to report the lot was empty. Brett's bus was gone, Carlos's truck was gone, everything. Like it never happened. The only evidence we had was my van with its dead battery and Klaus's smashed phone. Lieutenant Vega suggested we get my battery replaced at a shop nearby and consider leaving the area entirely. "Cancun is beautiful but has dark places," she said. These men, they know where tourists go. Please be very careful." We thanked her and left the station feeling shaken and angry. How many other people had fallen victim to Brett and his crew? How many hadn't been lucky enough to escape? We found an auto shop and got my battery replaced. The mechanic confirmed what I already suspected. The terminals had been loosened deliberately, just enough to drain the battery overnight. Someone had tampered with it. Klaus and Greta decided they were done with Mexico entirely and were heading back toward the US border. They offered to let me travel with them, but I was stubborn. I'd come all this way, spent months planning this trip, and I wasn't going to let some criminals chase me out of the country. I thanked them for saving my life and promised to stay in proper campgrounds from now on. We exchanged contact information, and they drove north while I headed into the Cancun hotel zone to find a secure place to park. I found an RV resort that cost $60 a night but had guards, gates, and cameras everywhere. It felt safe. For the first few days, I barely left the resort. I was jumpy, paranoid, seeing Brett's face in every young guy I passed. But slowly, I started to relax again. I went to the beach, explored local restaurants, even took a day trip to some cenotes. Life started feeling normal again. About a week after the incident, I was at the resort pool reading a book when another solo female traveler sat down next to me. Her name was Jennifer. She was 38, from Vancouver, and she'd been living in her van traveling through Central America for 6 months. We started chatting about our experiences, swapping stories about the places we'd been. When I told her about what happened with Brett, her face went pale. "Wait, what did he look like?" she asked. I described him, mid-20s, shaggy brown hair, yellow school bus. Jennifer's hands started shaking. "Oh my God," she said. "I met him in Playa del Carmen about 3 weeks ago. He was parked on a beach there, invited me to a bonfire, seemed really friendly. He asked me all these questions about where I was headed next, if I was traveling alone. I told him I was coming to Cancun. She pulled out her phone and showed me her social media. She'd posted about her travel plans publicly, including the specific date she'd arrive in Cancun and that she was parking at free spots to save money. He could have been following me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He could have been planning to do the same thing to me." We sat there in stunned silence, both realizing how calculated and patient Brett was. He wasn't just randomly targeting people. He was hunting them, tracking their movements through social media, building trust before striking. Jennifer immediately made her Instagram private and deleted posts about her location. We decided to report this information to Lieutenant Vega, so we drove to the police station together. Vega listened to Jennifer's story and added it to the file, but I could see the frustration on her face. "This man is like a ghost," she said. "We need to catch him in the act, but he is too careful." She advised us both to be extremely cautious, to never park alone in isolated areas, and to stop posting our locations online. As we left the station, Jennifer looked at me with tears in her eyes. "How many of us has he done this to?" she asked. I didn't have an answer, but I knew the number was higher than anyone wanted to admit. That night, back at the resort, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about all the solo travelers out there, women especially, parking in beautiful remote spots with no idea someone like Brett might be watching them, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jennifer and I became close after that, sticking together for safety. We decided to team up and travel in convoy, her van following mine, always staying at the same campgrounds. It felt safer in numbers. About 5 days after our conversation at the police station, Lieutenant Vega called me. They'd gotten a tip about Brett's yellow bus being spotted in Tulum, about 2 hours south of Cancun. The police there were coordinating with Cancun authorities to try to locate him, but Vega warned me he probably already knew they were looking and would disappear again. She asked if Jennifer and I would be willing to help. The plan made my stomach turn. They wanted us to act as bait. The idea was that we'd post on social media about parking at a known free camping spot in Tulum, make ourselves visible targets, and plainclothes officers would be watching nearby. If Brett showed up, they'd finally have him. It was risky and honestly terrifying, but I thought about all the other women who might become his next victims. Jennifer felt the same way. We agreed to do it. We drove down to Tulum 2 days later, following Lieutenant Vega's instructions exactly. We posted photos on Instagram and Facebook about this amazing free beach spot we'd found, tagged our location, mentioned we were 2 women traveling alone. It felt like painting targets on our backs, but we trusted that police were watching. The spot was a stretch of beach north of Tulum's main area, popular with budget travelers. When we arrived, there were already 4 other vans parked there, including one that made my heart stop, a yellow school bus at the far end. Brett was already here. Jennifer saw it too and grabbed my arm. "That's him," she whispered. We parked our vans about 50 yards away from his bus, close enough to be noticed, but far enough to run if needed. Lieutenant Vega had given us a panic button device that would alert undercover officers positioned nearby. We were supposed to act natural, set up camp, and wait to see if Brett approached us. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely set up my camp chair. Brett didn't approach right away. We saw him come out of his bus once, glance in our direction, then go back inside. Hours passed. Jennifer and I tried to act casual, making dinner, chatting loudly about how we planned to stay here for a few days because it was so peaceful. As the sun started setting, other travelers came over to introduce themselves, a French couple, a solo guy from Australia, a group of 3 friends from Mexico City. Everyone seemed normal, friendly. No sign of Carlos or any threatening locals. Maybe Brett had changed his method. Maybe he was being extra careful because police were looking for him. Around 8 o'clock, when it was fully dark, Brett finally walked over. He had a guitar slung over his shoulder and that same friendly smile. "Hey, I'm Brett," he said. "You guys just get here today?" Jennifer and I exchanged a quick glance. This was it. We had to act like we didn't know him, like we weren't terrified. "Yeah, just arrived this afternoon," I said, trying to sound casual. "Nice spot, right?" Brett sat down in the sand near our chairs, uninvited, and started playing his guitar. He was actually pretty good, playing some Jack Johnson song about the ocean. Other travelers started gathering around, attracted by the music. It turned into an impromptu beach bonfire gathering, people sharing beers and stories. Brett was charming, funny, the life of the party. He told stories about his travels, made people laugh, acted like everyone's best friend. But every few minutes, his eyes would drift to Jennifer and me, studying us. At one point, he asked Jennifer where she was from, if she was traveling alone, the same questions he'd asked before. She played along, giving vague answers. I kept my hand near my pocket where the panic button was hidden, waiting for any sign of danger. But nothing happened. Hours passed. People started drifting back to their vans, and Brett eventually said goodnight and walked back to his bus. Jennifer and I sat there confused and anxious. Why hadn't he made a move? Where were Carlos and his men? Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my van door handle being tested. Someone was trying to get in. My heart exploded in my chest. I'd locked both doors, but through the window, I could see a shadow moving around my van. I grabbed the panic button and pressed it, holding it down for 5 seconds like Vega had instructed. Then I heard Jennifer screaming. I looked out toward her van and saw 2 figures trying to break her window with a rock. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and started screaming, making as much noise as possible. "Help! Police! Help!" Other travelers started waking up, lights coming on in vans. The figures by Jennifer's van ran toward the darkness of the beach. I jumped out of my van and ran to Jennifer. She was inside, unhurt but terrified. "They were trying to get in," she sobbed. I saw their faces. One of them was Carlos. Within minutes, we heard sirens. Police trucks came roaring onto the beach, at least 6 of them. Officers jumped out with flashlights and guns drawn. Lieutenant Vega was there too, barking orders in Spanish. They surrounded Brett's yellow bus first, but when they opened it, it was empty. He was gone. They searched the entire beach area, but Brett, Carlos, and whoever else had been with them had vanished into the jungle. The police searched until sunrise, but found nothing except footprints leading into the dense jungle behind the beach. Lieutenant Vega was furious with herself, with her team, with the whole situation. He knew, she kept saying. Somehow he knew this was a setup. Jennifer and I gave our statements again, describing everything that happened. The other travelers at the beach were questioned too, but none of them had seen anything useful. The French couple mentioned that Brett had asked them earlier in the evening if they'd noticed the 2 new women who arrived, saying something about how we seemed nervous, like we were running from something. He'd been suspicious of us from the start, probably sensed something was off. Vega told us the operation was over, that it was too dangerous to continue, and that we should leave Tulum immediately. She promised they'd keep looking for Brett, but her tone suggested she didn't expect to find him. We packed up our vans as the sun rose, exhausted and defeated, and started driving back north toward Cancun. We were about 30 minutes into the drive when Jennifer called me on my cell phone. We'd been traveling in convoy, her van following mine, but when I looked in my rearview mirror, she wasn't there anymore. "Diane, I had to pull over," she said, her voice panicked. "My engine is overheating. Steam coming from the hood." My stomach dropped. I immediately pulled over too and waited for her to catch up. When she did, we both got out and looked at her engine. Coolant was leaking everywhere, pooling on the ground. "This wasn't an accident," Jennifer said, pointing to a hose that had been sliced partway through. "Someone sabotaged it. Last night, when they were trying to break in, they must have done this too." We were on a fairly busy highway, but it was still early morning and traffic was light. I felt exposed, vulnerable. We needed to get her van to a mechanic immediately. I called Lieutenant Vega and explained the situation. She said she'd send a police escort to meet us and guide us to a trusted mechanic in Playa del Carmen, which was about 20 minutes away. While we waited for the police, a pickup truck slowed down and pulled over ahead of us. My blood turned to ice when I recognized it. It was Carlos's white truck. He got out along with 2 other men, and they started walking toward us. "Get in my van right now," I told Jennifer. We both ran for my van and locked ourselves inside. Through the windshield, I could see Carlos approaching, that same machete hanging from his belt. He was smiling. He walked right up to my driver's side window and knocked on it, casual as could be, like he was just a helpful local stopping to assist stranded tourists. He said something in Spanish, gesturing toward Jennifer's van. When I didn't respond, he knocked harder. "You need help?" he said in broken English. "Engine problem, yes? I am mechanic. I fix for you." His smile widened, showing missing teeth. "Very cheap price. Or maybe free, if you are nice to Carlos." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Jennifer was on her phone trying to reach Lieutenant Vega, but there was no answer. I started my engine, ready to just leave Jennifer's van behind and drive away, but Carlos moved to stand in front of my van, blocking me. The other 2 men positioned themselves on either side. We were trapped. One of them had a crowbar and started walking toward my passenger side, where Jennifer was sitting. He raised it like he was going to smash the window. That's when I made a decision that probably saved our lives. I laid on the horn. Long, continuous blasts that echoed across the highway. Cars started slowing down to see what was happening. A semi-truck pulled over about 100 yards ahead. Carlos's expression changed from predatory to annoyed. He said something sharp to the other men, and they all quickly walked back to their truck. But before getting in, Carlos pointed at us, then drew his finger across his throat in an unmistakable gesture. Then they drove off, heading south, disappearing around a bend in the road. Jennifer and I sat there shaking, the horn finally silent. The truck driver who'd pulled over walked back to check on us, an older Mexican man who spoke some English. We tried to explain what happened, and he immediately called the police himself. Lieutenant Vega arrived 20 minutes later with 3 other officers. She was livid when we described what happened. "These men are escalating," she said. "They are getting bolder because they think we cannot catch them." She arranged for Jennifer's van to be towed while we rode with police escort back to Cancun. At the station, Vega sat us down and showed us something that made everything click into a horrible picture. They'd finally identified Brett's real name, Brandon Yates, 34 years old, not 26 like he claimed. He had warrants in the US for fraud and assault, had fled to Mexico 7 years ago, not 2. And Carlos wasn't just some local criminal. He was Brandon's cousin on his mother's side, a Mexican national with his own history of violence. They'd been working together for years, targeting tourists, stealing from them, and in at least 2 cases that police knew of, people had disappeared completely. The Canadian woman who'd reported a similar incident 3 months ago, they found her van burned out in the jungle 2 weeks ago. They never found her. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. We could have been next. Jennifer grabbed my hand, and we both just cried right there in the police station. Vega told us they were launching a major operation, coordinating with multiple police departments across Quintana Roo state, but she strongly advised us to leave Mexico. "I cannot guarantee your safety," she said bluntly. "These men know your faces, your vehicles, probably your names. They will not stop until you are gone or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jennifer and I left the station and drove straight to the US border, a 2-day journey that we did in one straight shot, taking turns driving, barely sleeping, just desperate to get out. We crossed back into Texas, and I've never felt such relief in my life. I never went back to Mexico. I sold my van 3 months later, just like I couldn't look at it anymore without remembering. Jennifer did the same. We still talk sometimes, but it's hard because every conversation brings back those memories. Last I heard from Lieutenant Vega, they still haven't caught Brandon or Carlos. They're still out there, probably with new names, new locations, hunting new victims. I think about that every day. I think about all the women posting photos of beautiful remote beaches, excited about their adventures, not knowing someone might be watching, planning, waiting. The van life dream became a nightmare I'll never forget, and I hope by telling this story, maybe I can save someone else from living through the same horror. My name is Victor Brennan. I'm 37 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I'd been planning my Cancun trip for over a year, saving every penny from my job as a warehouse supervisor to finally buy and convert a van for long-term travel. My younger brother Nathan, who's 31 and works in IT, thought I was going through some kind of midlife crisis, but honestly, I just needed to escape the routine. I bought a 2014 Mercedes Sprinter, gutted it, and spent 6 months turning it into a proper home on wheels. Insulated walls, a bed platform with storage underneath, a small sink, and a portable fridge. I wasn't trying to build some Instagram-worthy palace on wheels, just something functional that would let me disappear for a while. The plan was to spend 3 months in Mexico, starting in Cancun and working my way down the coast. What I didn't plan for was meeting Elena, and I definitely didn't plan for what came after. I crossed into Mexico at Brownsville and took the coastal route, stopping in small towns, eating at local places, trying to actually experience the country instead of just passing through it. The drive to Cancun took me about a week, and when I finally arrived, I did what most van lifers do. I started looking for free camping spots away from the expensive tourist areas. I found this online forum where travelers shared locations, and one spot kept getting mentioned, a beach area near Punta Sam, north of Cancun, where locals didn't mind if you parked overnight as long as you were respectful. I drove out there one afternoon and found about 6 other vans and RVs spread out along the beach. It looked perfect, quiet, beautiful, with local fishermen coming and going, but mostly ignoring the travelers. I parked near a small palapa bar where an older woman was selling ceviche and cold beer. Her name was Elena, and she was probably in her late 50s, with weathered skin and kind eyes. Elena spoke broken English, but we managed to communicate. She told me I could park nearby as long as I bought food or drinks from her occasionally, which seemed like a fair deal. Over the next few days, I fell into a comfortable routine, swimming in the morning, working on my laptop when I could get decent Wi-Fi from the bar, eating Elena's cooking, and watching spectacular sunsets. She started treating me like family, always making sure I had enough to eat, asking about my life back in the States, telling me stories about her children who'd moved to Merida for work. Other travelers came and went, but I stayed, feeling more at peace than I had in years. Elena introduced me to her nephew Miguel, a guy about my age who worked as a fishing guide. We started hanging out, and he'd take me out on his boat sometimes, showing me spots where tourists never went. Everything felt genuine, real, like I'd finally found what I was looking for. About 2 weeks into my stay, Elena asked me for a favor. Her daughter Sarah, who was 26 and lived in Cancun proper, needed help moving some furniture from her apartment to a storage unit. Elena said Sarah's boyfriend had left her and she couldn't afford movers. She offered to pay me, but I refused. Elena had been so kind to me. Helping her family was the least I could do. So one Saturday morning, I drove my van into the city to meet Sarah at her apartment. She was beautiful, spoke perfect English, and seemed genuinely grateful for the help. We loaded up a couch, some boxes, a dresser, normal moving stuff. But when we got to the storage unit, which was in a sketchy industrial area on the outskirts of the city, something felt off. The unit was in this compound surrounded by high walls and razor wire, with a guard at the gate who waved us through without checking anything. Sarah directed me to a unit in the back corner, away from the main buildings. When we opened the storage unit, it was already half full of stuff, but not furniture. I saw boxes stacked to the ceiling, some of them taped up, others open showing what looked like electronics, Phones, laptops, cameras. High-end stuff. Sarah saw me looking and quickly said it was her ex-boyfriend's business inventory, that he imported electronics legally but stored them here because his apartment was too small. It sounded plausible, but my gut was telling me something was wrong. We unloaded the furniture quickly, and Sarah was suddenly in a hurry to leave. On the drive back to her apartment, she was quiet, texting someone constantly. When I dropped her off, she thanked me, gave me a hug that lasted a little too long, and said if I ever needed anything in Cancun, I should call her. She handed me a piece of paper with her number. I drove back to the beach feeling uneasy, and when I told Elena about it later, she seemed surprised that Sarah had needed help moving. Sarah never told me she was moving, Elena said, frowning. That's when I knew I'd been used for something. I just didn't know what yet. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. 2 days after helping Sarah move, I was sitting at Elena's Palapa bar having breakfast when a black SUV pulled up to the beach. 2 men got out, both wearing expensive clothes that looked completely out of place for this area. Designer jeans, polo shirts, gold chains. They walked straight to Elena and started talking to her in rapid Spanish. I couldn't understand most of it, but I caught my name, Victor, mentioned several times. Elena's face went pale and she kept shaking her head, gesturing toward me with reluctant movements. One of the men walked over and sat down next to me without asking. He was probably in his 40s, with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Victor, yes, he said in accented English. My name is Rodrigo. I am Sarah's uncle. She tells me you helped her move some things. Very kind of you. I nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. Rodrigo leaned in closer. Sarah, she forgot to mention something. Some of those boxes you moved, they belong to me. Business items, you understand. Very valuable. I told him I didn't touch anything besides furniture, that I barely looked at the boxes. Rodrigo's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. Of course. But here is the problem, amigo. 3 boxes are missing from the storage unit. Electronics worth maybe 30,000 American dollars. Gone. And you were the last person there besides Sarah. My stomach dropped. I was being set up. This was a scam. Had to be. I didn't take anything, I said firmly. Check the security cameras at the storage place. Rodrigo laughed. No cameras in that area, unfortunately. Very unfortunate. The other man who'd come with him walked over and stood behind me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. I felt trapped. I think maybe you made a mistake, Rodrigo continued. Maybe you thought those boxes were Sarah's. Maybe you thought you could sell them. I understand, times are hard. But now you owe me $30,000, or... He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Or we find another way for you to repay this debt. I looked at Elena, and she had tears in her eyes. She said something in Spanish to Rodrigo, pleading, but he cut her off with a sharp word. Then he turned back to me. Elena is a good woman. She vouches for you. So I give you chance. You work for me, do some driving jobs, we forget about the money. Simple. I understood immediately what he was asking. He wanted me to be a drug mule or smuggle something across the border. My van had Colorado plates. I looked like a typical American tourist. I was perfect for whatever illegal operation he was running. And if I refuse? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Rodrigo stood up, straightening his polo shirt. Then we go to the police. I report theft. Mexican jail is not pleasant for Americans, Victor. Very not pleasant. And even if you somehow prove innocent, which will take months, maybe years, your van gets impounded, your money for lawyers. He shrugged. Your choice. You have 24 hours to decide. They walked back to their SUV and drove off, leaving me sitting there stunned. Elena immediately started apologizing, crying, saying she had no idea Sarah was involved with Rodrigo's business. He is not really Sarah's uncle, she explained through tears. He is her boyfriend, the one she said left her. But he did not leave. They work together, they find tourists, they trap them like this. I am so sorry, Victor. I did not know Sarah would do this to you. My mind was racing. I needed to get out of Mexico immediately, but if what Rodrigo said was true about reporting the theft, the police might stop me at the border. I asked Elena if she knew what kind of operation Rodrigo ran. She lowered her voice. Drugs, stolen goods, sometimes worse. People say he works for bigger organization, that he is connected to very dangerous people. Victor, you must be very careful. If you try to run, if you go to police, he will know. He has people everywhere. I sat there feeling completely helpless. I'd come to Mexico for peace, for freedom, and now I was trapped in some nightmare scenario where every choice seemed to lead to disaster. That night, I barely slept, weighing my options. I could try to drive to the border and hope they didn't stop me, but if Rodrigo had really filed a police report, I'd be arrested at customs. I could go to the police myself and try to explain, but without evidence and with my limited Spanish, who would believe me over a local with connections? Or I could do what Rodrigo asked, make 1 or 2 runs, and hope he'd actually let me go afterward. Every option felt like a trap. Around 3 in the morning, I heard tapping on my van door. I grabbed my flashlight and a wrench I kept nearby, my heart pounding. "Victor, it's Miguel," a voice whispered. I opened the door, and Elena's nephew was standing there looking scared. "We need to talk," he said quietly. We sat inside my van with the lights off, and Miguel told me something that changed everything. Rodrigo, he did this before. Last year, American couple, same thing. He made them do 3 runs across the border, bringing drugs. On the 4th run, they got caught by American DEA at the border. They are in prison now in Texas. Rodrigo set them up. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about doing a job and getting free. Rodrigo was using tourists as disposable mules, and when they became too risky or knew too much, he'd arrange for them to get caught and take the fall. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Miguel. He looked at me with genuine concern. "Because my Aunt Elena, she likes you. You're a good person. I cannot let this happen again. I tried to warn the couple last year, but I was too late. This time, maybe we can do something different." He had a plan, but it was risky and scary. We'd have to act fast, and if it went wrong, we'd both probably end up dead in a ditch somewhere. But looking at Miguel's face, I realized I didn't have any other choice. Rodrigo had me cornered, and the only way out was to take a chance that might get me killed. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. Miguel's plan was dangerous, but it was the only shot I had. He explained that Rodrigo kept detailed records of all his operations on a laptop he carried everywhere. Names, dates, transactions, everything. Miguel knew this because his cousin worked as a cleaner at one of Rodrigo's properties and had seen it. If we could get that laptop and copy the files, we'd have evidence to take to the federal police, the ones who weren't on Rodrigo's payroll. The Mexican government had a special unit that investigated cartel-connected criminals, and Miguel had a contact there, someone who'd been trying to build a case against Rodrigo for 2 years but couldn't get solid evidence. "The problem is getting close to Rodrigo," Miguel said. "He is very careful, always has guards. But tomorrow night, he has meeting at a restaurant in the hotel zone. Private room, only his closest people. That is when he brings the laptop to show numbers to his partners." Miguel worked at that restaurant as a busboy. That's how he knew the schedule. The plan was simple but terrifying. I'd show up at the restaurant during Rodrigo's meeting and tell him I'd decided to take his offer, that I'd do the driving jobs. While I distracted him and his men in the private room, Miguel would sneak in through the kitchen and copy the laptop files to a USB drive. It would take maybe 10 minutes if everything went smoothly. Then we'd immediately take the evidence to Miguel's contact at the federal police before Rodrigo even knew what happened. "What if they search me and find the USB drive?" I asked. Miguel shook his head. "You do not carry it." "I do. You just keep them talking, keep their attention on you. I will be invisible, just another busboy cleaning tables." I wanted to point out about 1,000 ways this could go wrong, but what choice did I have? We agreed to meet the next evening at 6 o'clock, an hour before Rodrigo's meeting. I spent the next day in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound, expecting Rodrigo's men to show up and drag me away. Elena kept apologizing, offering to help somehow, but I told her the less she knew the better. If this went wrong, I didn't want her implicated. Around 4 o'clock, Sarah showed up at the beach. She walked straight to my van with that same fake sweet smile. "Victor, hi. I heard Rodrigo talk to you. I am so sorry about the confusion with those boxes. He can be very serious about his business, you know." She was playing innocent, like she hadn't deliberately set me up. I played along, told her I understood, that I'd agreed to help Rodrigo with some work. She seemed relieved. "Good, that is good. He is actually not so bad once you know him. And he pays well." She touched my arm. "Maybe after you do this job, we can spend some time together? I like you, Victor." I felt connection when we were moving my things. It took everything in me not to tell her what I really thought. Instead, I smiled and said that sounded nice. She left after a few minutes. and I realized she'd been sent to check on me, to make sure I wasn't planning to run. At 6 o'clock, I met Miguel at a gas station near the hotel zone. He looked nervous but determined. He handed me an address and told me to show up at 7:30, not earlier. Rodrigo and his people, they will be drinking by then, more relaxed. That is the best time. Miguel would already be inside working his shift. I asked him what would happen after we got the evidence. My contact, Agent Ruiz, he will move fast. He will get arrest warrants, raid Rodrigo's properties. Everything happens at once. But we must get to him immediately after we get files, before Rodrigo realizes. You understand? No delays, no stops. We drive straight to federal police headquarters in Cancun. I nodded, my mouth dry. We synchronized our watches like we were in some spy movie, and then Miguel left to go to work. I sat in my van in that gas station parking lot for the next hour, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called my brother Nathan, not to tell him what was happening, but just to hear his voice. "Hey man, how's paradise?" he asked cheerfully. "It's complicated," I said, "but I wanted to tell you I love you in case." I stopped. "In case what?" Nathan asked, suddenly concerned. "Just in case," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow." I hung up before he could ask more questions. At 7:15, I drove to the restaurant. It was one of those upscale places in the hotel zone, the kind where tourists paid $40 for a plate of pasta. I parked in the lot and walked inside, my heart hammering. The hostess tried to seat me in the main dining area, but I told her I was there to see Rodrigo, that he was expecting me. She made a phone call, then led me through the restaurant to a private room in the back. The door opened, and I saw Rodrigo sitting at a long table with 4 other men, all of them dressed in expensive clothes, drinking whiskey, smoking cigars. The room smelled like smoke and cologne and danger. Rodrigo's face lit up when he saw me. "Victor, you came. I knew you were smart, man." He gestured to an empty chair. Sit. We were just discussing business. You meet my associates." The other men barely acknowledged me, just glanced my way with cold, calculating eyes. These weren't street criminals. These were businessmen who happened to traffic drugs and God knows what else. I sat down and Rodrigo poured me a glass of whiskey. "So, you have decided to help me. This is good choice. I promise you. Do good work, we take care of you." He opened his laptop, which was sitting right there on the table, and started showing me maps on the screen. "Your first job is simple. You drive to Matamoros, near the border. There, you meet my friend. He gives you package. You drive across to Brownsville, deliver package to address I give you. Then you come back. Easy, yes?" I nodded, pretending to pay attention, but I was watching the room. Where was Miguel? It was already 7:35. I needed to buy more time. I started asking questions. What if I got stopped at the border? What was in the package? How much would I get paid? Rodrigo answered patiently, probably thinking I was just nervous. One of the other men, who'd been quiet until now, leaned forward. "You know what happens if you steal from us or go to police, yes?" he said in heavily accented English. "We find you. Anywhere. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But we find you." The threat was clear. It was 7:50 and Miguel still hadn't appeared. I was running out of questions to ask and Rodrigo was starting to look impatient. "Why so many questions, Victor? You are nervous?" "This is normal for first time." I forced a laugh and took a sip of whiskey, trying to calm my shaking hands. Just then, the door opened and Miguel walked in carrying a tray with a bottle of tequila and glasses. He didn't make eye contact with me, just played his role perfectly, the invisible servant. "Ah, excellent," Rodrigo said. "Premium tequila, the good stuff." While Miguel set down the glasses and started pouring, I kept talking, asking about the timeline, when I'd need to leave, anything to keep their attention on me. Miguel moved around the table slowly, methodically, and when he got behind Rodrigo, I saw him glance at the laptop. The screen was still on, unlocked. This was the moment. I knocked my whiskey glass over deliberately, spilling it across the table. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I said loudly, jumping up. Everyone at the table reacted, grabbing their phones and papers to keep them from getting wet. Rodrigo cursed and pulled his laptop away from the spreading liquid. In the chaos, Miguel grabbed a cloth from his tray and started wiping the table, moving closer to the laptop. While Rodrigo was distracted yelling at me for being clumsy, I saw Miguel's hand move lightning fast. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and plugged it into the laptop's port. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Miguel kept wiping the table, acting completely natural, while Rodrigo sat back down and reopened his laptop to make sure it wasn't damaged. He didn't even notice the USB drive sticking out of the side. "You are very clumsy, Victor," Rodrigo said, annoyed. "Maybe you are too nervous for this work." I apologized again, playing up my nervousness, which wasn't hard because I was genuinely terrified. One of the other men made a comment in Spanish and they all laughed. Miguel finished cleaning and picked up his tray. "Anything else, senor?" he asked Rodrigo in Spanish. Rodrigo waved him away dismissively. Miguel left the room and I could breathe again. But now we had a new problem. The USB was still plugged into the laptop, copying files, and I had no idea how long it would take. I needed to keep them distracted for at least a few more minutes. I started asking about payment, how much I'd make per run, whether it was cash or wire transfer. Rodrigo seemed pleased that I was asking about money. It made me look greedy and predictable, which was exactly what he wanted. "First run, $5,000 cash," he said. "You do well? Maybe next time 10,000. You become regular driver for us. You make very good money, Victor. Better than warehouse job in Denver, yes?" He'd been checking up on me, new details about my life back home. That realization sent a chill down my spine. These people were thorough. About 3 minutes passed, and I was running out of ways to stall when Miguel appeared in the doorway. He made a subtle gesture, tapping his watch twice. The files were copied. Now he just needed to get the USB drive out without being noticed. Miguel walked back in with a fresh bottle of whiskey. "Compliments of the house, Senor Rodrigo," he said. Rodrigo smiled and gestured for him to pour. As Miguel moved around the table again, he reached Rodrigo's side where the laptop sat. In one smooth motion, while pouring whiskey with his right hand, he pulled the USB drive out with his left and slipped it into his pocket. Nobody saw it. I couldn't believe how calm he was. Miguel finished pouring and left again, and I knew we were in the clear. Now I just needed to get out of there. "So, when do you need me to leave for Matamoros?" I asked. Rodrigo checked his phone. "Tomorrow night. I send someone to get you at 6 o'clock. You drive through the night, cross the border in the morning when traffic is busy. Less suspicious." I nodded and stood up. "Okay, I should get going then. Get some rest before tomorrow." Rodrigo stood too and shook my hand, his grip uncomfortably tight. "Do not disappoint me, Victor. Many people are counting on you." The other men watched me leave with those same cold, predatory eyes. I walked out of the restaurant trying not to run, trying to look normal. Miguel was waiting in the parking lot, standing by his motorcycle. "You got it," I whispered. He patted his pocket and nodded. "Everything. Bank accounts, shipment records, names of police he pays, everything. Agent Ruiz will have enough to arrest half of Cancun. We agreed to meet at the federal police headquarters in 30 minutes. I'd drive my van. He'd take his motorcycle, in case we needed to split up if someone followed us. I got in my van and started driving, checking my mirrors constantly for any sign of Rodrigo's men. The headquarters was in a secure building downtown, surrounded by gates and armed guards. When I arrived, Miguel was already there. We went inside together and asked for Agent Ruiz. The receptionist made a call, and 5 minutes later a serious-looking man in his 40s came down. Miguel spoke to him rapidly in Spanish, showing him the USB drive. Agent Ruiz's eyes widened as Miguel explained what was on it. He immediately brought us upstairs to a secure office. For the next 2 hours, Agent Ruiz and 3 other federal officers went through the files while Miguel and I gave statements. The evidence was overwhelming. Spreadsheets showing drug shipments, photos of product, text messages coordinating with corrupt police officers, bank transactions, even videos of Rodrigo threatening people. "This is incredible," Agent Ruiz said in English. "We have been trying to build this case for 3 years. You have given us everything we need." He explained that they'd launched coordinated raids that night, hitting all of Rodrigo's properties simultaneously, arresting everyone in his organization before they could destroy evidence or flee. But he warned us that we were both in serious danger now. "Rodrigo will know you betrayed him. Even in jail, he has reach. You cannot stay in Cancun, maybe not in Mexico." He offered to escort me to the border immediately with a police convoy, and he arranged for Miguel to stay in protective custody until the trials were over. Miguel looked at me, and we both understood that our lives had just changed forever. We'd done the right thing, but the cost was high. I'd never see Eleno again, never finish my trip, never have the freedom I'd been searching for. Agent Ruiz moved fast. Within an hour, he had a 3-vehicle convoy ready to escort me to the Brownsville border crossing. 2 police trucks, one in front and one behind my van. Miguel hugged me before I left, thanking me for having the courage to go through with the plan. You saved lives today, Victor. Maybe your own, maybe others who would have been trapped like you. I wanted to feel good about that, but mostly I just felt exhausted and scared. Agent Ruiz assured me that by the time I crossed into Texas, Rodrigo and his associates would already be in custody. But you must leave Mexico tonight, he emphasized. Do not stop, do not talk to anyone. Once you are across the border, you contact FBI. I give you a name, Agent Sarah Chun in the San Antonio field office. She will take your statement and put you in witness protection program if necessary. The reality of that hit me. Witness protection, a new identity, never being able to live normally again. This wasn't how my adventure was supposed to end. We left the federal police headquarters around 11 at night. The drive to the border would take about 6 hours, putting us there around 5 in the morning. As we drove through Cancun streets, I could already see the operation in action, police lights flashing in different parts of the city, roadblocks being set up, helicopters overhead with spotlights. Agent Ruiz called me on my cell phone as we drove. The raids are happening now. Rodrigo was arrested at the restaurant, still sitting there drinking with his associates. He was very surprised. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. However, Ruiz continued. 2 of his men were not at the locations we raided. They are missing. One of them is Sarah. We believe they may have been warned somehow. Please be very careful on this drive. My stomach dropped. Sarah was still out there, and she knew what I looked like, knew my van. If she'd been warned that I'd betrayed Rodrigo, she might try to stop me before I reached the border. We drove through the night on Highway 180, heading north toward the border. The roads were mostly empty at this hour, just occasional semi-trucks and a few cars. I stayed between the 2 police vehicles, feeling somewhat safe with the protection. Around 2 in the morning, we were passing through a small town called Champiton when I saw headlights approaching fast from behind. A white sedan was weaving through traffic, coming up on the rear police truck. My phone rang. It was the officer in the truck behind me. We have a vehicle pursuing us at high speed. Stay calm. Maintain your speed. Do not stop for anything. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I watched in my side mirror. The sedan tried to pass the police truck, but the officers swerved to block them. Then I saw the sedan's passenger window roll down, and the horrifying reality of what was about to happen hit me. There was a gun pointing out of the window. The officer shouted into the phone, "Get down," and I heard gunshots. The rear police truck swerved violently, and I saw sparks flying off the road. They were shooting at the tires. The front police truck accelerated and pulled alongside me, the officer gesturing frantically for me to speed up. I floored the gas pedal, and my van surged forward. Behind us, the white sedan was still pursuing, and now I could see a second vehicle joining them, a black pickup truck coming from a side road. These were Rodrigo's men, the ones who'd escaped the raids. They were coming after me with everything they had. The police trucks were trying to protect me while calling for backup, but we were in a remote area and help was at least 20 minutes away. The shooting continued, and I heard something hit the back of my van. They were aiming for me now. My rear window exploded inward, glass spraying everywhere. I ducked low, barely able to see the road, my van swerving dangerously. One of the police trucks dropped back to engage the pursuers directly, and I heard more gunfire, louder now, a full firefight happening on a dark highway in the middle of Mexico. The remaining police truck stayed with me, the officer screaming into the phone for me to keep driving no matter what. We were doing 90 miles an hour on a two-lane highway, and I could see the other police truck had stopped completely in the road behind us, blocking the pursuers and exchanging fire. I felt tears streaming down my face, pure terror and adrenaline. Then I heard a sound that made my blood freeze, a helicopter overhead. For a second I thought it was backup, but then I realized it wasn't a police helicopter. It was smaller, private, and it was tracking us with a spotlight. Rodrigo's organization was bigger than anyone realized. They had resources, connections, military-grade equipment. The helicopter swooped low, and I saw someone leaning out with what looked like a rifle. The police truck beside me swerved erratically, and the officer shouted that we needed to get off the highway. There was a turnoff ahead, a dirt road leading into dense jungle. "Follow me," the officer yelled, and we both veered sharply onto the dirt road, the van's suspension screaming as we bounced over potholes. The jungle swallowed us, branches scraping against my van, the helicopter spotlight sweeping back and forth trying to find us in the dense canopy. We drove deeper into the jungle for about 15 minutes, the road getting worse, until finally the officer pulled over in a small clearing and jumped out. I got out too, shaking so badly I could barely stand. "We hide here until backup arrives," he said. He was young, maybe 30, and he looked as scared as I felt. His partner's police truck was still back on the highway, and he didn't know if they were alive or dead. We could still hear the helicopters circling overhead, searching. The officer made calls on his radio, speaking urgently in Spanish. I understood enough to know he was calling for immediate assistance, reporting our position. Then the engine noise of the helicopter changed. It was landing somewhere nearby. They were coming for us on foot. The officer grabbed his rifle and told me to get back in my van, lock the doors, and stay down. "If something happens to me, you drive out of here. Follow this road. It eventually connects to Highway 307. Do not stop until you reach the border." I wanted to argue, to say we should stick together, but I could already hear voices in the jungle, people moving through the brush. I locked myself in the van and crouched on the floor, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Through the window, I saw the officer take a defensive position behind a tree, his rifle aimed toward the sounds. Then flashlights appeared through the trees. 4, maybe 5 people moving toward us. The officer shouted something in Spanish, a warning, but they kept coming. More gunshots, loud and close, the sound echoing through the jungle. I heard the officer cry out, and then silence. The flashlights got closer to my van. I was about to die in a jungle in Mexico, murdered by cartel members, and my body would probably never be found. I thought about Nathan, about my parents who'd died when I was young, about Elena who'd tried to help me. This wasn't supposed to be how my story ended. Then I heard new sounds, more vehicles, more helicopters, and the voices outside suddenly shouted in alarm and started running away. The cavalry had finally arrived. Federal police and Mexican military surrounded the area within minutes, securing the scene. I climbed out of my van to find the young officer on the ground, wounded but alive, being treated by medics. They'd shot him in the shoulder, but he'd survive. 3 of Rodrigo's men were captured trying to flee through the jungle. Sarah was one of them, and when they dragged her past my van, she looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You ruined everything," she screamed at me. "Everything." Agent Ruiz arrived an hour later with reinforcements. He looked grim. The other police truck, both officers were killed. This is now a murder investigation on top of everything else. Rodrigo's organization is finished, but the cost. He didn't need to finish. 2 good men had died protecting me. I gave a full statement right there in the jungle, everything recorded, every detail documented. Then they escorted me the rest of the way to the border with a full military convoy. No more chances, no more risks. We crossed into Texas at dawn, and I've never felt such overwhelming relief as when I saw that American flag and those Border Patrol agents. Agent Sarah Chun from the FBI met me in Brownsville. She explained that I'd be in protective custody for the next few months while the Mexican government prosecuted Rodrigo and his organization. My testimony would be crucial. They'd need me to identify people, verify documents, explain everything that happened. My van life dream was over. I sold the van to a dealer in Texas for half what it was worth. I couldn't even look at it anymore without seeing that shattered rear window, without hearing gunshots. Nathan flew down to get me, and we drove back to Denver together. I didn't talk much during that drive. What could I say? I'd gone to Mexico looking for freedom and found a nightmare instead. It's been 8 months since all this happened. Rodrigo got sentenced to 43 years in a maximum security prison. Sarah got 20 years. 12 other members of their organization were convicted. Agent Ruiz called me last week to say they dismantled the entire operation, rescued 4 tourists who'd been held captive, and prevented who knows how many more people from being victimized. He told me I was a hero, that I'd saved lives. But I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who barely survived something that never should have happened in the first place. Those 2 police officers who died, they were the real heroes. I think about them every day. I think about Elena too. Agent Ruiz told me she was never charged with anything, that she genuinely didn't know what Sarah and Rodrigo were doing. She's still running her little palapa bar on that beach, probably serving ceviche to new travelers who have no idea what happened there. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever travel again, if I'll ever trust strangers or take risks or feel that sense of freedom I was searching for. Right now, sitting in my apartment in Denver, working my warehouse job again, living the routine I tried so hard to escape, I honestly don't know. But I'm alive. That has to count for something. And maybe someday, that will be enough. My name is Garrett Finch. I'm 43 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. I've been doing the van life thing for about 2 years now. Converted a 2018 Ford Transit myself. Spent every weekend for 6 months working on it. The freedom it gave me was unreal. I could just drive wherever I wanted, work remotely as a software consultant, and wake up to different views. My girlfriend Maya, she's 38, joined me about 8 months ago. We met at a climbing gym back in Austin, and when I told her about my lifestyle, she was all in. Sold most of her stuff, quit her job as a graphic designer, and we hit the road together. This trip to Mexico was supposed to be our big adventure, 3 months exploring the Yucatan Peninsula. We'd spent the last week in Cancun, mostly staying at designated campsites near the hotel zone. But tonight we wanted something different, something more authentic, away from the tourist traps and overpriced lots. We drove about 40 minutes outside the main city, following this dirt road Maya found on some overlanding forum. The post said it led to this secluded beach area where locals sometimes camped, totally free, with incredible star views. The sun was setting when we finally found the spot, a clearing surrounded by dense jungle on 3 sides and the Caribbean on the other. There were no other vehicles around, which honestly felt perfect. We'd been cramped next to RVs and tour buses all week, listening to drunk college kids yelling at 3 a.m. This was exactly what we needed. The beach wasn't pristine like the resort areas. There was driftwood scattered around, some old fishing nets tangled in the sand, and what looked like the remains of a small wooden structure that had probably been destroyed in a hurricane years ago. But it had this raw, untouched quality that made it feel special. Maya started preparing dinner while I set up our external camp chairs and checked the solar panels. The weird thing was how quiet everything felt. Usually, you'd hear birds or insects or something, but there was just this heavy silence broken only by the waves. I remember thinking it was probably because we were so isolated. The jungle here was thick, almost impenetrable, and the nearest town was miles back. Maya made fish tacos with supplies we'd grabbed from a local market, and we ate watching the last colors drain from the sky. She kept saying how perfect this was, how we should have skipped the touristy areas entirely and just wild camped the whole time. I agreed with her, but something felt off. Can't really explain it. Just this nagging feeling in my gut, like when you forget to lock your front door, but you're already halfway to work. After dinner, we walked along the beach for a bit. The moon was nearly full, bright enough that we didn't need our headlamps. That's when Maya found the Polaroid. It was half buried in the sand, near those old fishing nets. The photo was faded and water damaged, but you could still make out what it showed. A woman, maybe in her 30s, tied to a chair. Her mouth was covered with duct tape, and her eyes were wide with terror. The disturbing part wasn't just the image itself, but the fact that someone had written on the white border at the bottom, Number 7, October 2023. Maya wanted to leave immediately, said we should drive back to town and report it to the police. But I convinced her it was probably just some sick joke, maybe from a film student project or a Halloween prank that washed up from somewhere else. Looking back now, I realize how stupid that sounds, but in the moment, I just didn't want to believe what we'd found was real. We headed back to the van, and I locked the doors, something I rarely did when we camped. Maya was scrolling through her phone, trying to get signal to search for any missing persons reports in the area, but we had zero service out here. That isolation that felt so appealing an hour ago now felt suffocating. I suggested we just get some sleep and drive out first thing in the morning, maybe stop at a police station on our way north. She agreed reluctantly, and we crawled into the back of the van where our bed was set up. The windows were covered with our blackout curtains for stealth camping, and normally that made me feel secure, hidden. Tonight, it just made me feel blind. I kept thinking about that photo, about the number written on it. Number 7 implied there were at least 6 others. And if this happened in October 2023, that was barely a year ago. The woman in that photo, was she still alive? Did anyone ever find her? I barely slept that night. Every sound had me wide awake. The wind rustling the palm fronds, the ocean washing up on shore, branches cracking somewhere in that jungle behind us. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps crunching on sand outside the van. Real slow, deliberate steps, like someone was circling us. I held my breath, listening, my hand gripping Maya's shoulder to wake her without making noise. She jolted awake immediately, and I could feel her entire body go rigid when she heard it too. We just laid there in complete darkness, listening to whoever or whatever was outside. The steps stopped right by the driver's side door. I swear I could hear breathing, deep, measured breaths like someone was standing there deciding what to do next. Then nothing. Absolute silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes. Maya whispered that we should start the engine and get the hell out, but I was terrified that any movement would provoke whoever was out there. When morning finally came and sunlight started bleeding through the curtain edges, I worked up the courage to peek outside. Nobody there. No footprints in the sand around the van. No signs anyone had been near us at all. Maya thought maybe we'd both been so freaked out by that photo that we'd imagined the whole thing, that it was just paranoia playing tricks. I wanted to believe her, but something felt wrong about the scene. Our camp chairs that I'd left set up near the fire pit, they'd been moved. Not dramatically, but they were facing the van now when I'd left them facing the ocean. Small details like that, they stick with you. We skipped breakfast, just started packing everything up as fast as we could. That's when Maya noticed the Polaroid we'd found was gone. She'd put it on the dashboard before we went to sleep, planning to take it to the police, but now it had vanished. I checked every inch of that van. Under seats, in storage compartments, between cushions, nothing. The doors were still locked from the inside, windows sealed. There was no way someone could have taken it without us hearing them break in, yet it was gone. Maya was practically hyperventilating at this point, saying we needed to leave immediately, but I was already in the driver's seat turning the key. The engine cranked, but wouldn't start. Tried again, same thing. Third time, fourth time, nothing but that awful grinding sound. I'm not a mechanic, but I know my van, and it had been running perfectly fine for months. This wasn't a dead battery or bad fuel. Something was actively wrong. I popped the hood and checked everything I could think of. That's when I saw it. The distributor cap was cracked, and several spark plug wires had been cut. Clean cuts, too, like someone used wire cutters. This wasn't mechanical failure or animal damage. Someone had sabotaged us deliberately. Maya started crying, which scared me more than anything else because she never cries. She's the tough one between us, the person who stays calm during emergencies. I pulled out my phone even though I knew there was no signal, just hoping maybe one bar would appear. Nothing. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere with a disabled vehicle, and whoever had done this knew we couldn't leave. The disturbing realization hit me then. This wasn't random. Someone had been watching us, waiting for us to go to sleep, then methodically ensured we couldn't escape. I remembered that Polaroid, the number 7, and suddenly understood we might be number 8 and 9. Maya suggested we hike back to the main road, try to flag down a car, but that was 40 minutes of driving on that dirt path. It could take hours on foot, and we'd be completely exposed the entire way. I made the decision to stay with the van, lock ourselves inside, and wait until someone else showed up at this beach. Surely other campers would come eventually, right? That forum post Maya found had dozens of comments from people who'd stayed here. We rationed our water, kept all the doors locked, and I grabbed the tire iron from under the driver's seat, the only thing resembling a weapon we had. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, turning the van into an oven even with the windows cracked. Around noon, Maya grabbed my arm and pointed toward the jungle tree. There was a man standing there, maybe 50 yards away, just watching us. He was older, probably in his 60s, wearing dirty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there perfectly still. I honked the horn, yelled out the window asking if he could help, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring for another minute, then slowly backed into the jungle and disappeared. Maya was convinced that man was the one who'd sabotaged the van. I wasn't so sure. Something about the way he just stood there felt more like a warning than a threat, like he was telling us to be careful. Either way, we were stuck, and the afternoon heat was becoming unbearable. I decided to try fixing the van myself. We had a basic toolkit, and maybe I could rig something temporary to get us mobile again. I told Maya to stay inside with the doors locked while I worked under the hood. The whole time I was out there, I felt exposed, vulnerable. My eyes kept darting to that jungle tree line, expecting to see that old man again or worse. The spark plug wires were definitely cut, clean slices through the rubber coating. I managed to strip the damaged sections and splice them back together using electrical tape from our emergency supplies. It was a hack job, but it might work long enough to get us back to civilization. I was tightening the last connection when I heard Maya scream inside the van. Not a startled yelp, but a genuine terror scream that made my blood freeze. I dropped the wrench and yanked open the sliding door. She was pressed against the far wall, pointing at the back windows. Someone had drawn on the outside of the glass, symbols or letters. I couldn't tell which, made with what looked like mud or blood. The words were in Spanish, Yalos Elegii. I don't speak much Spanish, but I knew Elegii meant chosen or selected. Maya had her translation app pulled up, even though we had no data connection. She must have screenshotted earlier. I already chose you. That's what it said. The writing was fresh, still wet, which meant whoever did it had been right outside while I was working on the engine just feet away on the other side of the van. That's when the real panic set in. This wasn't just some random psycho. This was planned, calculated, and we were being toyed with. I slammed the hood closed and jumped back in the driver's seat, turned the key, praying my repair job would work. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Maya was shouting, "Go, go, go," but I was already throwing it in gear, spinning the tires in the sand as we lurched forward toward that dirt path. The van was handling rough. Clearly my quick fix wasn't perfect, but it was moving, and that's all that mattered. We bounced along that terrible road, every pothole and rock making the whole vehicle shudder. I was going way too fast for the conditions, but stopping wasn't an option. Maya kept looking in the side mirror, saying she thought she saw someone running behind us through the trees, keeping pace, but I couldn't take my eyes off the path ahead. About 20 minutes in, the engine started making this horrible knocking sound. Temperature gauge was climbing into the red. I pushed it anyway, kept driving until we finally reached the paved main road. That's when the engine died completely, just seized up with this awful grinding noise and stopped. Smoke started pouring from under the hood. We coasted to a stop on the shoulder, and I wanted to scream. We'd made it to the main road, but we were still miles from any town, and now the van was completely dead. At least there was a chance of flagging down another vehicle here. We waited for maybe 15 minutes before an old pickup truck appeared in the distance. I jumped out and waved my arms frantically. The truck slowed down, and I felt this rush of relief until I saw who was driving. It was the same old man from the beach. He pulled up next to us, engine idling, and just stared at me through his open window. I didn't know what to do. Run? Get back in the van? He finally spoke in heavily accented English. You should not have stayed there. That place, it is cursed. Bad things happen. I asked him if he'd sabotaged our van, and he looked genuinely confused, shook his head. He said he'd seen our vehicle yesterday evening and came back this morning to warn us, but we were already sleeping. He'd left a note on the windshield, but when he returned at sunrise, the note was gone and he saw someone else near our van. Someone he'd seen before in those areas, someone dangerous. I asked who, what did they look like, but he just kept saying, "Muy peligroso," and that we needed to leave this region immediately. Maya leaned out the window and showed him a screenshot on her phone. A news article she'd saved weeks ago about missing tourists in the Quintana Roo area. The old man's face went pale when he saw it, and he crossed himself like he'd seen a ghost. The old man introduced himself as Esteban. He owned a small farm about 10 miles up the road and said he'd tow us there. Let us use his phone to call for help. We didn't have much choice. The van was dead. We were exposed on this highway, and whoever had been hunting us at that beach could show up any minute. Esteban hooked a chain to our front axle and pulled us slowly down the road. Maya and I stayed inside the van during the tow, doors locked, and I kept that tire iron across my lap. She was shaking, still trying to process everything. She pulled up more saved articles on her phone. There'd been 7 documented disappearances in this area over the past 18 months. All tourists. All people who'd gone off the beaten path looking for authentic experiences or hidden beaches. The authorities blamed it on cartel activity or people getting lost in the jungle, but the pattern was too specific. Young couples, solo travelers, small groups. They vanished without a trace. Esteban's farm appeared after about 30 minutes. A small property with a modest house, some chickens wandering around, and what looked like a workshop or garage. He unhooked us near the garage and gestured for us to come inside his house. Everything in my gut screamed not to trust this situation, but what else could we do? We followed him in, and his wife, a tiny woman named Carmen who spoke no English, immediately brought us water and food. The house was old but clean, filled with religious icons and family photos. Esteban let us use his landline, and I called the nearest police station in Playa del Carmen. Tried to explain what happened in my broken Spanish mixed with English, told them about the photo we found, the sabotaged van, the message on our window. The officer on the phone sounded bored, like he'd heard it all before. Said they'd send someone out to take a statement, but it might be a few hours. Maya asked Esteban directly, who did he see at the beach that morning? Esteban sat down heavily, and Carmen brought him coffee before disappearing into another room. He told us there was a man who lived somewhere in that jungle. Nobody knew exactly where. Local people called him El Carnicero, the butcher. Not his real name, just what people whispered about. Esteban said about 5 years ago, this man worked at a resort in Cancun, maintenance or security, something like that. He was fired after a guest complained he'd been in her room without permission, standing over her bed while she slept. Nothing could be proven, so they just let him go. After that, he disappeared into the areas outside the city, and that's when people started vanishing. Esteban pulled out a newspaper clipping from 2023, a blurry photo of a man in his 40s, average looking, the kind of face you'd forget immediately. The headline was about a suspect in a missing persons case, but apparently there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. The photo showed him being questioned then released. I felt sick looking at that picture because I realized I'd seen him before. 2 days ago, at the market where we bought groceries. He'd been standing near our van when we came out, and I'd thought nothing of it, just another person in the parking area. But now I remembered how he'd watched us load the groceries, how his eyes followed Maya specifically. He'd tracked us, probably followed us to that beach, waited for the perfect moment. Esteban said the police knew about him, but could never find evidence, never could locate where he lived. The jungle was too vast, too dense. People suspected he had a place out there, somewhere hidden, where he took his victims. The disturbing part was that Esteban believed this man wasn't working alone anymore. There'd been reports of a younger man, maybe in his 20s, seen in the same areas. A protege, maybe a son. 2 hunters instead of 1. Carmen came back into the room suddenly, speaking rapid Spanish to Esteban and pointing toward the window. He stood up fast, told us to get away from the windows, turn off the lights. Maya grabbed my hand, and I could feel her pulse racing. Esteban grabbed a shotgun from a closet. Apparently everyone out here kept weapons, and peered through the curtain. He said something had triggered the motion sensor near his driveway. Could be an animal, could be nothing, but he wasn't taking chances. We all stood there in the dimness, listening. I heard a vehicle engine in the distance, getting closer. Headlights swept across the front windows. Esteban chambered a shell and told us in broken English that if anything happened, there was a cellar door in the kitchen. We should hide there and stay quiet. The vehicle stopped somewhere outside. Doors opened and closed, more than one person. Then voices speaking Spanish, casual, almost friendly. Someone knocked on the front door. Esteban moved toward the door, but didn't open it. He called out asking who was there, and a voice responded, official sounding, saying they were police responding to our call. Maya whispered that seemed too fast, that there's no way they could have gotten here this quickly from Playa del Carmen. Esteban must have thought the same thing because he asked them to identify themselves, to slide their badges under the door. There was a pause, then laughter. Not friendly laughter, the kind that makes your skin crawl. The voice switched to English, clearly directed at us. Garrett and Maya, right? From Austin, Texas. You called about your van trouble. Nobody had mentioned our names on that call to the police. Nobody knew where we were except the actual cops, and these people weren't cops. Esteban backed away from the door, pointed urgently toward the kitchen, but before we could move, something heavy slammed against the door. Once, twice, the frame splintering on the third hit. We ran. Carmen was already pulling open the cellar door in the kitchen floor, a narrow space that dropped into darkness. Maya went down first, then me, and Carmen started to follow, but Esteban grabbed her, kissed her hard, and told her something in Spanish that made her cry. He wasn't coming with us. He was going to hold them off, give us time. The door above slammed shut, and we heard him drag something heavy over it, probably the kitchen table. Then the horrible sound started, the front door breaking completely, multiple footsteps entering, Esteban yelling, the shotgun blast, so loud it hurt my ears even through the floor. More shouting, another blast, then a scream that wasn't Esteban. Silence for a moment. Then voices again, calmer now, searching the house. Carmen was sobbing silently next to Maya, praying under her breath. I felt around in the darkness and found we were in a small concrete room, maybe 8 by 8 feet, with some shelves of canned goods and supplies. There was no other exit. Above us, footsteps moved through the house methodically. Someone was checking every room, opening closets, moving furniture. They were getting closer to the kitchen. I heard one of them say something in Spanish, then laughter again. They knew we were down here. Of course they did. Where else could we have gone? The scraping sound of the table being moved made Carmen whimper. Light suddenly flooded down as the cellar door opened. I squinted up and saw 2 figures silhouetted against the kitchen lights. One was the man from the newspaper photo, El Carnicero. The other was younger, leaner, exactly like Esteban described. The older man spoke in perfect English. We've been doing this for a long time. Nobody finds us, nobody stops us. You know why? Because we're careful. We choose people who won't be missed right away. People who are off the grid, traveling alone in places they shouldn't be. But you too, you made it easy. You came right to our hunting ground. The younger one. I could see now he looked eerily similar to the older man, definitely related, started descending the ladder. I still had that tire iron, and when he got close enough, I swung it as hard as I could. Caught him in the knee and he went down screaming. The older man shouted something and started down the ladder himself, but Carmen suddenly moved. She pulled something from her dress pocket, a small revolver, and fired up through the opening. The shot went wild, but it was enough to make him retreat. She fired again, and this time I heard him curse in pain. She screamed at us to go up, go now while he was hurt. Maya went first up the ladder, and I pushed Carmen ahead of me. When I got to the kitchen level, I saw the younger one on the floor clutching his ruined knee, and the older man was bleeding from his shoulder, stumbling toward the front door. Esteban was on the floor near the living room, not moving, and I knew he was gone. We burst out the front door into the night. Their vehicle was parked there, a white panel van, windowless, exactly the kind you'd expect. Maya was already running toward it, and I realized what she was thinking. The keys were in the ignition. We jumped in, and I started it up while Carmen climbed in the back. As I threw it in reverse, the older man appeared in the doorway, one arm hanging useless, face twisted with rage. He raised a pistol and fired. The windshield spiderwebbed but didn't shatter. I floored it backward down the driveway, then spun around and accelerated toward the main road. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing there, getting smaller, but he wasn't chasing us. He was just watching us go, and somehow that was more terrifying than anything else, like he knew this wasn't over, like he could find us whenever he wanted. We drove for 20 minutes before finding a gas station with lights and people. I called the real police from there, and this time they came. Multiple units, ambulances, everything. They found Esteban's body. They found the younger man still in the cellar with his shattered knee. But El Carnicero was gone, vanished back into that jungle like he'd never existed. The police searched for days, found nothing. No camp, no structure, no evidence of where he'd been living or where he'd taken his victims. The van we'd stolen from him, they processed it thoroughly. Found traces of blood from at least 8 different people in the back, along with tools and restraints that I can't even describe without feeling sick. They matched some of the DNA to missing persons, including a woman who disappeared in October 2023, probably the one from that Polaroid. We gave statements, spent weeks dealing with Mexican authorities, and eventually flew back to Austin once everything was processed. Carmen went to live with her sister in Merida. We sold the transit van, couldn't even look at it anymore, let alone sleep in it. Maya moved back into an apartment, got a normal job. We're still together, but we don't travel anymore. Don't camp, don't take road trips. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear footsteps outside, and I have to check every lock 3 times before I can sleep again. The scary part is they never caught him. El Carnicero is still out there somewhere, still hunting. And sometimes, late at night, I get text messages from unknown Mexican numbers. No words, just photos, Polaroids of different places we've been, different cities we've visited since returning home. He's watching. He's waiting. And someday, he might decide to finish what he started. My name is Iris Pemberton. I'm 52 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I never thought I'd be one of those people who just drops everything and buys a van, but after my divorce finalized last spring, that's exactly what I did. Spent 30 years as a high school English teacher, married to the same man since I was 23, and suddenly I was single, childless by choice, and realizing I'd never actually lived for myself. So I bought a used Sprinter van, watched about 100 YouTube videos on conversions, and built out the interior myself. Took me 4 months of weekends. My best friend Donna thought I was having a breakdown, but honestly, I'd never felt more clear-headed. The plan was simple: take a year off, travel North and South America, write that novel I'd always talked about. Mexico was my third stop after spending time in Baja California, and I'd been excited about the Yucatan for months. I'd been in Cancun for 5 days, staying mostly at established campgrounds near the coast, but the crowds were getting to me. Spring break season was ramping up, and everywhere I went there were drunk tourists and overpriced everything. I wanted something quieter, more authentic. That's when I met Lucas at a local cafe. He was Mexican-American, maybe 35, traveling solo on a motorcycle documenting traditional Mayan sites for some photography project. We got to talking, and he mentioned this incredible spot his family used to visit when he was a kid, about an hour outside the city. An old cenote surrounded by jungle, with a small clearing where you could park and camp. He said tourists never went there because it wasn't marked on any maps, just locals who knew about it. He was heading there himself that evening and asked if I wanted to follow him out there, said it would be safer than me trying to find it alone. I hesitated because I'd been pretty careful about not trusting strangers, but Lucas seemed genuine. He showed me his portfolio of photographs, his press credentials, even his mother's phone number in San Diego if I wanted to verify he was real. Something about him felt safe, and honestly, I was tired of being paranoid all the time. So I agreed to follow his motorcycle out there before sunset. The drive took us off the main highway onto progressively smaller roads until we were on a dirt track barely wide enough for my van. The jungle pressed in on both sides, so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet into it. Lucas kept checking his rearview mirror to make sure I was still behind him, waving occasionally. After about 45 minutes, we arrived at this clearing. It was beautiful. The cenote was maybe 30 feet across, perfectly circular. With crystal clear water, you could see straight to the bottom. Ancient stone steps led down to the water's edge, probably Mayan construction from centuries ago. Lucas parked his bike and helped me position my van under some trees for shade. There were remnants of old campfires, some carved initials in the trees, evidence that people had been coming here for years. He told me his grandfather used to bring him here as a kid, that local families considered it a sacred place. We gathered wood and built a fire as the sun started setting, and Lucas shared some of the food he'd brought. Tamales his aunt made, fresh fruit from a market. He was easy to talk to, asked about my life, my teaching career, why I decided to do this van trip. I found myself opening up more than I usually did, telling him about the divorce, about feeling like I'd wasted my best years. He said sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. It sounded like something from a self-help book, but coming from him, it felt true. As darkness fell completely, the jungle came alive with sounds, insects, birds, things I couldn't identify. Around 9, Lucas said he was going to set up his tent on the other side of the clearing to give me privacy. He seemed respectful, kept appropriate distance, which made me trust him more. Before he left the fire, he mentioned something that stuck with me. He said his grandfather always told him to never swim in the cenote after dark, that the old people believed something lived down there, something that came up when the sun went down. I laughed it off as local superstition, but Lucas didn't laugh. He just said his grandfather was rarely wrong about things like that, and then he walked to his tent. I sat by the fire for another hour, writing in my journal, enjoying the solitude. The cenote water looked black and infinite at night, and I understood why people would make up stories about it. When I finally decided to turn in, I noticed Lucas's tent was dark. He must have gone to sleep early. I locked myself in the van, pulled the curtains, and settled into bed. That's when I heard the splashing coming from the cenote, like something large had just surfaced. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a large fish or a crocodile. Do they even have crocodiles in cenotes? I didn't know, and that ignorance made everything scarier. The splashing continued for a few minutes, then stopped abruptly. I waited in the darkness, listening, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I heard footsteps, wet footsteps on stone, like someone had just climbed out of the water and was walking up those ancient steps. I peeked through a tiny gap in my curtain, trying to see Lucas's tent, wondering if he was hearing this too. His tent was still dark, no movement. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear anything, and that's when I saw a figure standing near the cenote's edge. It wasn't Lucas. This person was taller, broader, and completely naked from what I could tell in the moonlight. They just stood there, water dripping off their body, facing toward my van. I ducked back from the curtain, my mind racing. Maybe it was another camper who'd arrived after dark and decided to take a swim? But who swims in a cenote at night in the middle of nowhere? And why were they just standing there staring at my van? I heard Lucas's tent zipper open, heard him call out something in Spanish. The figure by the cenote didn't respond. Lucas called out again, louder this time, and I heard him walking toward the figure. I wanted to warn him, to tell him something felt wrong, but my voice was frozen in my throat. Through the curtain gap, I watched Lucas approach with his headlamp on. The beam hit the figure, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It was a man, probably in his 40s, completely nude and covered in what looked like mud or algae. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes reflected the light like an animal's eyes. Lucas stopped walking, and I heard him say "Dios mío" under his breath. The man smiled, this disturbing wide smile that showed too many teeth, and then he spoke. His voice was wrong, too deep and wet sounding, like he had water in his lungs. He said something in Spanish that I couldn't understand, but Lucas backed away slowly, keeping the headlamp trained on him. The man started walking toward Lucas, that horrible smile never fading, and Lucas turned and ran toward my van. He pounded on my door, shouting for me to open it, to let him in now. I unlocked the sliding door, and he dove inside, slamming it shut behind him. He was breathing hard, scared in a way that terrified me because moments ago he'd seemed so calm and collected. I asked him what that man said, and Lucas just kept repeating, "We need to leave. We need to leave right now." He said the man told him he'd been waiting, that he knew we would come, that we belonged to the cenote now. I scrambled to the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine started, thank God, and I threw it in reverse without even turning on the headlights. As I backed up, my lights swept across the clearing and I saw him. He was standing right where we'd been parked, still naked, still smiling, but now he wasn't alone. There were others emerging from the jungle, 3, 4, maybe 5 more figures, all in the same state. Some were men, some were women, all with that same gray-pale skin and those reflecting eyes. Lucas was saying something about leaving his motorcycle, his equipment, but I didn't care. I found the dirt track and accelerated as fast as I dared in the darkness. The van bounced violently over roots and rocks, branches scraping the sides. In the rearview mirror, I could see them following us on foot, running faster than any human should be able to run, keeping pace with the van even as I pushed it to 30 miles per hour on that terrible road. Lucas grabbed my phone from the cup holder and turned on the flashlight, pointing it out the back windows. The light hit one of them, a woman this time, maybe in her 20s, and she was close enough that I could see her face clearly. Her skin wasn't just pale, it was bloated and waterlogged, like a drowning victim who'd been submerged for days. Her hair was matted with weeds and algae, but she was running, moving, alive somehow. Lucas started praying in Spanish, and I focused on driving, on getting us back to that main road. The figures chased us for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes before they finally gave up, disappearing back into the jungle. We didn't stop. I drove all the way back to the highway, and even then I kept going until we reached a gas station with bright lights and other people. Lucas was shaking, and honestly, so was I. He kept saying those weren't people, that his grandfather's stories were true, that things lived in the cenotes that shouldn't exist. We sat in that gas station parking lot for over an hour, both of us trying to process what we'd just seen. Lucas was scrolling through his phone, searching for anything that might explain it. Local legends, folklore, scientific explanations. He found stories about cenotes being portals to Xibalba, the Mayan underworld, about creatures called Alex that guarded sacred waters. But none of it explained what we'd actually witnessed, those bloated, waterlogged people running after us with inhuman speed. I suggested maybe they were just locals trying to scare off trespassers, people wearing makeup or costumes. Lucas looked at me like I was insane. He'd seen them up close, had smelled them. He said they reeked of rot and standing water, that no living person could smell like that. I didn't want to believe in monsters or supernatural explanations, but I also couldn't deny what my own eyes had seen. Those weren't costumes. That wasn't makeup. Lucas decided he needed to go back in daylight, needed to retrieve his motorcycle and camera equipment, thousands of dollars worth of gear he couldn't just abandon. I told him he was crazy, but he said if we went during full daylight with other people, maybe brought some local authorities, it would be safe. Whatever those things were, they'd only appeared at night. I reluctantly agreed to go with him, partly because I felt guilty he'd lost everything trying to save me, and partly because I needed to understand what had happened. We spent the rest of the night in my van in that gas station lot, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's bloated face, those reflective eyes. When morning came, Lucas contacted a cousin of his who worked as a police officer in a nearby town. He explained we'd been chased from a camping spot by aggressive locals and needed help retrieving property. He didn't mention the part about them being waterlogged corpse people. His cousin, Miguel, agreed to meet us with another officer. We rendezvoused at a coffee shop around 10 a.m. Miguel and his partner, a younger guy named Carlos, both looked skeptical when Lucas explained we needed them to come with us to the cenote. They asked why we didn't just call it in properly, file a report, and Lucas gave them some story about not wanting to create an international incident since I was an American tourist. Miguel seemed to buy it, or at least he agreed to help for family's sake. We drove in a convoy, my van following their police truck, back down those same roads from last night. Everything looked different in daylight, less menacing, almost beautiful. When we reached the clearing, it was empty and peaceful. Birds were singing, sun was filtering through the trees, and the cenote looked like an ordinary pool of turquoise water. Lucas's motorcycle was exactly where he'd left it, his tent still standing. Nothing seemed disturbed. Miguel and Carlos walked around the clearing, checking the area. They found our fire pit from last night, our tire tracks, but nothing unusual. No footprints except ours, no evidence anyone else had been there. Miguel asked what exactly we'd seen, and Lucas tried to explain, but even as he spoke, I could hear how insane it sounded. Naked people climbing out of the water, chasing us through the jungle at night. Miguel exchanged a look with Carlos, that universal look that says, these tourists are crazy. Carlos suggested maybe we'd seen a jaguar or coyote, and our imaginations filled in the rest. Lucas got frustrated, started arguing with them in rapid Spanish. While they were distracted, I walked over to the cenote's edge and looked down into the water. It was so clear, you could see maybe 40 feet down to where the limestone walls continued into darkness. And there, in that darkness, I saw movement. Something large, pale, shifting in the depths. I called out to the others, but by the time they came over, whatever I'd seen had moved deeper or disappeared. Miguel was losing patience. He said if we didn't have an actual crime to report, they needed to get back to work. Lucas started packing up his tent and loading his motorcycle, defeated. That's when Carlos found something near the tree line, a pile of clothes, old and rotted, partially buried in leaves. He called Miguel over, and they started examining them carefully. There were multiple sets, men's and women's clothing, some with wallets still in the pockets. Miguel pulled out an ID card, water-damaged but still readable. It belonged to a German tourist who'd been reported missing 3 years ago. They found 5 more IDs in those clothes, all belonging to people who'd vanished in the region over the past decade. Carlos radioed for backup, said they needed forensics out here. Miguel's attitude completely changed. This was now a crime scene, possibly multiple homicides. Within 2 hours, the clearing was swarming with police, forensic investigators, and even some federal agents. They'd cordoned off the entire area with yellow tape and were photographing everything, bagging evidence, taking measurements. Miguel kept Lucas and me separated, taking our statements individually. I told him everything exactly as it happened, the figures emerging from the water, their appearance, how they chased us. The detective taking my statement was professional, but clearly skeptical. He kept asking if we'd taken any drugs, if we'd been drinking, if I was on any medications that might cause hallucinations. I insisted we were both completely sober, that what we saw was real. He wrote it all down, but I could tell he thought I was either lying or delusional. They brought in a dive team around noon. 2 divers in full gear descended into the cenote while everyone watched from above. They were down there for maybe 20 minutes, and when they surfaced, both looked shaken. They'd found something. The divers reported there was a submerged cave system extending from the cenote, and inside one of the chambers they'd found human remains. Multiple sets, in various stages of decomposition, some appearing quite recent. One of the federal agents, a woman named Agent Reyes, started asking much more pointed questions. She wanted to know if we'd seen anyone living around here, any structures or camps. Had anyone followed us to this location? Did we tell anyone else where we were going? Lucas explained how he'd known about this place from childhood, that only locals were aware of it. Agent Reyes said that was part of the problem. This cenote had been used as a dumping ground for years, possibly decades, and someone local had to be responsible. She asked if the figures we saw could have been people living in the jungle, perhaps mentally disturbed individuals who'd gone feral. I wanted to agree with her rational explanation, but I couldn't forget those waterlogged faces, that impossible speed. They kept us there until evening, taking multiple statements, having us walk through exactly where we'd seen each figure. A forensic anthropologist arrived and started examining the clothing pile more carefully. She determined that some of the items dated back even further than the ID suggested. One dress appeared to be from the 1980s based on the style and fabric. She said something disturbing to Agent Reyes that I overheard. The clothing showed evidence of being submerged for long periods, but the bodies they represented had apparently been removed from the water and stripped at this location. Why would someone drown victims in the cenote, then bring them back up to remove their clothes? It didn't make sense from a typical homicide pattern. Agent Reyes told her to keep that observation quiet for now. As the sun started setting, the whole atmosphere in the clearing changed. The investigators were packing up, the dive team was leaving, and nobody seemed eager to stay after dark. Agent Reyes made it clear that Lucas and I were not to leave the Cancun area. We were key witnesses, possibly suspects, and they'd need us available for further questioning. She gave us a hotel recommendation in the city and said we'd be contacted within 24 hours. As the last police vehicle pulled out, Lucas and I were left alone in the clearing again with my van and his motorcycle. Neither of us wanted to stay, but it was already getting dark and that dirt road was treacherous enough in daylight. Lucas suggested we leave immediately, drive slowly with headlights, but I was already moving toward the van. That's when we heard it. That same splashing sound from the cenote. We both froze. The investigators had put up lights around the area that were still running on generators, so the clearing was well lit. We could see the cenote clearly. The water's surface was rippling and bubbles were rising from the depths. Something was coming up. Lucas ran to his motorcycle. I ran to my van. I started the engine, but I couldn't help watching the cenote. A hand broke the surface. Pale, bloated, fingers spread wide. Then a head emerged, water streaming off gray skin. It was the same man from last night, that horrible smile already forming as he spotted us. He pulled himself out of the water with disturbing ease, and then more hands appeared behind him. They were all coming back. I screamed at Lucas to go, and his motorcycle roared to life. I threw the van into gear and followed him as those figures climbed from the cenote. More than last night. I counted at least 10 before I looked away to focus on driving. The generator lights illuminated them clearly, showed every horrible detail of their waterlogged bodies, their rotted clothing, their grasping hands. They came after us again, running with that same impossible speed, but this time we had a head start. Lucas's motorcycle was faster on the rough terrain, and he pulled ahead, but I kept his taillight in sight and followed. The figures chased us for miles, never tiring, never slowing, until we finally hit the paved road and I could accelerate beyond their capabilities. We didn't stop until we reached the hotel Agent Reyes had recommended, a mid-range place in the tourist zone with security guards and lots of lights. Lucas parked his motorcycle, and we both practically ran inside, checking behind us constantly. The lobby was full of spring breakers and families, normal people doing normal things, and it felt surreal after what we'd just experienced. We got separate rooms on the same floor, and Lucas said he'd meet me in the hotel bar in an hour after we both showered and changed. I stood under scalding water for 30 minutes, trying to wash away the fear and the smell of jungle and rot that seemed stuck in my nostrils. When I finally felt somewhat human again, I checked my phone. There were dozens of missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, all from the past hour, all while I was in the shower. No voicemails, just repeated calls. The most recent one had come through 2 minutes ago. I met Lucas in the bar, and he looked as rattled as I felt. He'd been doing research on his laptop, reading everything he could find about that cenote. Turns out it had a name, Cenote Extebe, named after a female demon from Mayan legend who lured men to their deaths. Local forums mentioned it as a place to avoid, with vague warnings about people disappearing there, but nobody gave specifics. Lucas found one blog post from 2019 written by a Mexican anthropologist who'd studied the site. She documented evidence of ancient ritual sacrifice. The Mayans had thrown offerings and possibly people into the cenote as tribute to the gods of the underworld. But the disturbing part was her conclusion. She believed the practice had never really stopped, that there was evidence of modern offerings continuing into recent decades. The blog went dead after that post, and the anthropologist herself had disappeared. Lucas tried to find information about her, but came up empty. My phone rang again, same unknown number. This time I answered it, putting it on speaker so Lucas could hear. Heavy breathing on the other end, wet and labored, like someone with fluid in their lungs. Then that voice, that horrible, deep, wet voice from the cenote. Iris Pemberton, age 52, Portland, Oregon, 847, Hawthorne Boulevard, apartment 3B. He was listing my home address, my personal information. I hung up immediately, hands shaking. Lucas grabbed the phone and tried to call back, but it went straight to a number not in service message. How did they have my information? How did they even know my name? I'd never told anyone at that cenote who I was or where I lived. Lucas suggested maybe they'd gone through my van while we were sleeping, found documents or mail with my address. The thought of those things rummaging through my personal belongings while I slept made me physically ill. We went to Agent Reyes immediately, drove to the police station and demanded to see her. She came out looking exhausted, said they'd been processing the crime scene all day and had found remains of at least 15 different individuals in that underwater cave system. She asked why we were there, and we told her about the phone calls, about seeing those figures again after the investigators left. Her expression hardened. She said they'd had officers stationed at the cenote until sundown and nobody reported seeing anything unusual. She pulled up security footage from the entrance of the dirt road. They'd installed a temporary camera there. The footage showed us leaving around dusk, but nobody else appeared on camera before or after. No figures chasing us, no other vehicles, nothing. Lucas lost it, started yelling that she wasn't listening, that something was killing people and they were ignoring it. Agent Reyes called security to escort us out, said we needed to calm down or she'd charge us with interfering in an investigation. We left the station defeated and terrified. Back at the hotel, Lucas suggested we just run. Forget about being available for questioning. Forget about our stuff at the cenote. Just drive north to the border and get out of Mexico. I wanted to agree, but something stopped me. Those things knew where I lived. They'd call my phone. Running wouldn't help if they could find me anywhere. I needed to understand what they were, what they wanted. Lucas thought I was insane, but he also didn't leave. We spent that night in my hotel room, both of us too scared to sleep alone, taking turns keeping watch. Around 3 a.m., my phone rang again. Same number. This time when I answered, there was no breathing, just the sound of water dripping. Then a woman's voice, young, scared, "Help me. Please help me. They keep us down here. They make us." The line went dead. Lucas and I stared at each other in horror. That voice sounded alive, sounded recent, not like those bloated figures we'd seen. Someone was still alive down in that cenote. We drove back to the cenote at first light, this time bringing everything we might need: diving masks from a shop, waterproof flashlights, rope, a knife. The police presence was gone, budget cuts or disinterest, who knows. The clearing was empty, the generator lights dead, just yellow tape fluttering in the morning breeze. We approached the cenote carefully, checking the water's surface. It looked calm, innocent, beautiful in the dawn light. Lucas said he couldn't dive, had never trained for it, but I'd done some scuba in my 20s. Enough to know how to hold my breath and swim down. He tied the rope around my waist, said he'd pull me up if I tugged twice. I took several deep breaths and dove in. The water was shockingly cold once you got below the surface layer. I swam down following the limestone wall, using the flashlight to peer into crevices and cave openings. About 30 feet down, I found an opening large enough to swim through. I pulled myself inside, and the passage opened into a chamber. I surfaced in an air pocket, gasping, and pointed my flashlight around. The chamber was maybe 20 feet across, and there were people there, 3 women and 1 man, all chained to the walls, all very much alive, but clearly starving and dehydrated. When my light hit them, they started screaming for help.